If we could come to order, please. Good afternoon to you all. Welcome councillors, officers, members of the public that are with us, and those that may be joining us on the webcast. I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of the Maidstone Joint Transportation Board today, January the 17th, 2018. Before we start the main order of business, can I just take the opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, it will indeed be the real thing. No practices are planned. The officer to my right will ascertain the appropriate action and we will follow her instructions if the alarm does sound. And I'd like also just to remind you all that tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council. But if anyone else is intending to record, can you please let me know now? And I ask this question not to stop you, but merely so that others in the chamber would be aware that you are recording. Does anybody intend to record? I see that nobody indicates. Thank you. So we can move straight into the agenda, and I'll start by taking apologies. I have notice of apologies from Councillor Tom Sams, Councillor Garton and Councillor Wilby.
Okay.
Councillor Hodson.
I am here, Chairman, but Councillor Carter is sitting in a dentist chair at the moment.
One further apology, Councillor Mrs Brown, parish member, has also given apologies. So I think that covers all apologies. Therefore, are there any substitute members? Councillor Perry?
Councillor Perry for Councillor Garton.
And Councillor English?
Councillor English for Councillor Wilby.
Right, I think we've covered all of those, not missed anyone. I'll just take this opportunity to draw to your attention under urgent items that I have agreed to accept an urgent update relating to agenda item 17, the A274 Sutton Road, as it does contain additional information which was supplied after the publication deadline. You should have all had that circulated. You should have paper copies in front of you. Just so I know how to proceed, have you all had an opportunity to look at that? Or would anybody like some additional moments to read and digest? It sounds like everybody has seen that. At this point, I'll take a note of visiting members, if I may. I'll start at the furthest back from the left. It would assist officers if you would come to the microphone and announce. So, line up ready if that makes things quicker, please.
Councillor Burton, here to speak on item 17, please, Chairman.
Thank you.
Councillor Spooner from Bearsted Ward, here to observe.
Councillor Harper, presenting agenda item number 9A and speaking on items 13 and 16.
Councillor Atkinson in respect of items 9A, 13 and 16, and I may need to speak on some of them. Thank you.
Councillor Barnard on item 17.
Thank you, councillors. I don't think there's anybody missed. At agenda item 5, I'll take disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures to make this evening, please? Nobody flinches, nobody murmurs. I will take that as no further disclosures this evening. And similarly, agenda item 6, are there disclosures of lobbying? Would it be fair to say we've all been lobbied on agenda item 17 for the record? Okay, we'll note that. Are there any other lobbying to mention. Councillor Mrs Springer.
I was lobbied on an item that actually isn't on the agenda, but I wanted to ask whether it, I just wanted to ask officers about it. It was to do with aerodrome approach at Detling and the parking.
I myself have received correspondence on that, so it's better to note it than not. More than one head nods, but possibly not everybody. Would you just indicate if that's the case so that the clerk can make a note? Looks like 4 of us. Right, if there are no further declarations of lobbying, we will move on. Item 7 is where we will consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. There are no yellow papers attached to the agenda this evening, so I propose everything will be in public. Before I take the minutes, those of you that sit with me on other meetings know that the system I usually operate for indicating when you want to speak is to ask you to put your name card upright like that, and then I will endeavour to make sure that we capture everybody wishing to speak in a fair manner. So if we could adopt that protocol this evening, it would be useful. So we come to agenda item 8, which are the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 18th of October 2017, circulated with the papers for all to read, peruse and examine in advance. And since you've all done that, I'm sure, are there any amendments, or may I take those as an accurate record? Thank you. That being agreed, I shall sign those later. First item of business is a petition report. I believe Mrs Watson's going to assist us with this. This relates to Platts Heath Safe Transport Scheme, and I do have a short statement from one of the members who submitted their apologies in relation to it after the officer introduces. So over to you, if I may. Right. My apologies, I am confusing you all because that amendment to the order was if Councillor Sams had been able to attend. So please ignore what I just said in relation to agenda item 14, and we're actually continuing with the agenda as per the order, which is item 9, and this is the presentation of petitions. Note that petitioners speaking have a maximum of 5 minutes to do so. And I would like to draw to your attention that there are procedure rules relating to submission of petitions, which include deadlines for submission and minimum numbers of signatures. And I have waived all of those conditions in relation to the petitions tonight to ensure that everybody does have full and ample opportunity to present views in relation to tonight's agenda. So notice has been given for a petition in relation to Gatland Lane. I believe, Councillor Harper, you are to present this one. If you'd be kind enough to come to the table. If you could just hold one moment while I check something. We just need to make a quick check of eligibility to sit on the board this evening. So just by way of explanation, in order to attend as a substitute member to this board, you need to be registered by a resolution of full council to be so. I think, Councillor English, you were previously, but perhaps in the last revision that changed. So could we record you as visiting member instead?
I will have to leave if I'm not a substitute member, as I have another appointment. I did query it, and I was informed by the group leader that she had in fact changed that, but as she hadn't, then she hasn't. And I can't say how pleased I am, because I did not want to sit on this meeting.
So, some people get all the luck. All right. Well, thank you for attending anyway, Councillor.
Sorry? Thank you.
Councillor Harper, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, we've got the agenda item later on Gatlin Lane, so I won't say so much now in terms of the petition to try to avoid repetition. But we've obviously been speaking to local residents in the Gatlin Lane area, and as a result, we've presented the petition. The issue of the double yellow lines has proved, as you'll see from the later report, very contentious in Gatlin Lane, and we're pleased to see the recommendation from the council officers to replace the double yellow lines by single yellow lines, which is very much, as I say, in spirit of what local people want. We'd ask if it might be possible, when we come on to that later item, to consider a slight amendment which would be in line with the petition, which is to minimise a disruption to residents whilst, if you like, maximising the impact in terms of protecting the environment when the school's in action. If the single yellow lines could be in use on a Monday to Friday basis, limited from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the morning, and then from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I note on page 26, which you have before you, the Appendix 2, that the timings for the school keep clear markings, which are on the opposite side of the roads, the single yellow lines, precisely do operate for a short period in the morning and a short period in the evening, obviously when people are arriving and departing from the school. So I think that's all I'll say in respect of the petition, because, as I say, we'll be covering it again later.
Thank you, Councillor. Procedural rules give us three options with petitions. One is that without further discussion we can refer it to the next meeting. Another option is that it can be considered at this meeting in conjunction with a report of relevance, or it can be considered at this meeting without a report of relevance. Since we have the very item on the agenda, agenda item 16, I propose that we receive that petition and then hold the debate in relation to that item. Councillor Bird, did you want to speak, or were you just...
Just to support you, Chairman.
Right. Okay, that being the case, that's how we will deal with that. Thank you. Okay, so one of the rules that has been relaxed today is normally we would have 3 petitions. There are technically 4, but there is a main petition which is being presented by Mr. Richard Weeks, but I understand that simultaneously you'll effectively be presenting the other 2 petitions which are similarly related. So, Mr. Weeks, you have the floor.
Thank you. I've lived in Sutton Road and now Bell Meadow for over 40 years. There are 3 petitions totalling over 900 signatures. 2 were independently undertaken by residents of Sutton Road visiting those properties immediately affected by this scheme. The other includes written comments and online representations, predominantly by people who live or work in the immediate area. Few would doubt that the Sutton Road-Whittington Street junction is in need of improvement, but the scale and cost of the proposed works is unbelievable. Kent Highways described the impact on the local area as medium. Lord knows what major would mean. 13 of the mature cherry trees that have been a welcoming sight to drivers entering the town from the south-east for nearly 50 years are to be felled, together with the hedge and another 17 large trees along the Sutton Road, and replaced by what can only be called an ocean of tarmac. And not just the trees, but the entire wide verge fronting Bell Meadow. Perhaps you can think of a road junction on this scale in an existing residential setting. I certainly can't. Residents feel their views have been ignored and that they must pay the price for the large-scale housing developments along the Sutton Road, which are of no benefit to them. They have a school and a vet, but no doctor, dentist, pharmacy, etc. They have to drive to ours. Consultation on the scheme has been amateurish. The first newsletter was only delivered a week before the engagement meeting in August, and then missed out the houses in Sutton Road most affected by the scheme. The second engagement session was essentially by invitation only and timed to preclude those who work. Representations were to be made within just a week, but the video, which excluded the Q&A session, did not appear on the website until after the deadline had passed. The website contains no detailed information on traffic flows to back up the proposals and little information regarding environmental factors such as pollution and noise. I would argue that compared to most of the other junctions included in the so-called Maidstone Integrated Transport Package, this is one of those which suffers the least congestion, even following the construction of hundreds of new homes just mentioned. But unfortunately, it has a large area of adjacent land already owned by Kent Highways. In short, it is the only one where any major road construction is possible, and the only one where all the money extracted from the aforementioned developers can be spent. It is obvious that reducing congestion here will just make things even worse at the next pinch point, be that the Wheatsheaf or the Winningston Street Ashford Road junction, where there is no scope to change things other than tinker with the traffic lights. Here the queues will be even longer and take even longer to clear. Those signing the petitions have many other concerns which are broadly covered in the feedback provided to KCC and included in your report here. I urge you to read them. I'm just going to pick one: noise. Kent Highways have told residents who are concerned about the devaluation of their properties that they may claim compensation under the Land Compensation Act 1973. They have not advised residents of the Noise Insulation Regulations 1975, which states that dwellings within 300 metres of roadworks are eligible for the installation of noise insulation, secondary glazing, etc., if it is calculated that within 15 years of the opening of the altered road, the traffic noise level at one or more facades will increase by at least 1 decibel and will be not less than 68 decibels. The project manager has already admitted to a 3 decibel increase. The question is whether the 68 threshold will be exceeded. I have asked the KCC for the current noise levels, but have not yet received an answer. KCC must put this information on their website. I trust that the cost of the scheme, which has jumped from £3 to £4 million recently, includes a suitably large contingency. In conclusion, this scheme has no support, as evidenced by the signatures collected from local residents. We are the ones who live there and have to suffer the consequences. We would prefer no scheme at all, but if anything needs to be done, it must be on a much smaller scale, and retaining the land and trees that currently separate our front doors from the Sutton Road. As Winston Churchill would have said, never in the field of highways planning have so few people had to suffer so much to house so many. Thank you. Oh, really.
Thank you, Mr. Weeks, and impeccable timing. And I'd just draw members' attention to the fact that the full wording of the petitions is within the papers in front of you. Similar scenarios presented as for the previous petitioner, and again I suggest that we consider that petition in the context of the relevant agenda item later this evening. Question next. Next agenda item is questions and answer session from members of the public. And I have received notice that there is a question from Councillor Cathcart of Stockbury Parish Council. If I could ask you to come to the microphone, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Lyle Cathcart. I live in Detling, and I'm here on behalf of Stockbury Parish Council and also Thurnham Parish Council. Aerodrome Approach, Detling, this is the road off the A249 which serves the entrance to Detling Aerodrome Industrial Estate and Binbury Lane, which leads to the villages of Stockbury and Hartlip. And I have forwarded outline information and photographs to all members of the board. Parking along Aerodrome Approach has been a problem since 1982, and Kent County Council and Maidstone Borough Council have taken progressive piecemeal measures over the years to address the parking, associated environmental and unsociable behaviour problems, with infrastructure measures and finally double yellow lines being introduced in 2010 to all but 120 metres. The absence of the completion of this section of double yellow lines is now a serious safety hazard, with the vehicles parking on a two-way traffic blind bend, especially at night when HGVs are parking without the required legal lighting. Recent visits by MBC parking enforcement has lessened but not cured the parking on the established double yellow lines, but has increased the parking on the section without the agreed double yellow lines. My question, when will these outstanding double yellow lines be completed, as previously agreed at meetings with the authorities, to ensure the future safety along this road? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I have been given, at least in part, a prepared answer to give you to some of the points you raise. Aerodrome Approach, Detling, is regularly patrolled by Maidstone Borough Council's civil enforcement officers, and action is taken against any vehicle observed as parked on active restrictions. Enforcement action has had some positive impact. However, a number of vehicles have elected to migrate to uncontrolled areas of the highway further along Aerodrome Approach. Patrols will continue in an effort to reduce levels of inconsiderate parking on the yellow line restrictions. Unfortunately, civil parking enforcement powers do not extend to areas of highway where no traffic order or line marking exists to manage driver behaviour. Kent County Council are aware of the lorry parking issues with Aerodrome Approach, Detling, and will look at progressing a traffic regulation order and installing additional double yellow lines after April 2018, when funding becomes available. If you have a supplementary question, you are at liberty to ask.
No, excuse me. No, I'm pleased that you have confirmed that they will continue to monitor it. The monitoring is having some effect, but as I say, we are partially going towards solving one problem. We've created another one, which is the safety aspect, and that's the one I'm mainly concerned about, because it's on a blind bend and it's two-way traffic.
Okay, well, your comments are noted, and as already said, KCC will look at progressing the additional measures after April, which is fairly soon. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Agenda item 11 is just an opportunity for us to review the future work programme circulated in the agendas. I don't think there's anything particular to add to that. So, members, can I just ask that that is noted? Thank you. Councillor Willis. Microphone, if you would please, Councillor.
I believe there's one further meeting in this annual year, political year. Could we add on to that rail services? Sorry to nag you about this, but it's a really serious situation about rail services being Thameslink and the South Eastern franchise negotiations to the JTBs. I think it's relevant for Kent and Maidstone to work together to get the best result. At the moment, there's a dire situation where we're delayed, having Thameslink delays and question marks, and also potentially losing our high-speed services.
Can I push you to be a little more precise about how you would like this board to approach that?
Yeah, a report to this committee, I think, of what's being done to try and lobby national government appropriately and what we can do as county and borough together to get this sorted out.
Okay, I'll ask the clerk to add that to the list for the next agenda setting, and in collaboration with the Vice Chair, we'll see what can be done in that regard. Agenda item 12, there is a reference from Planning Committee in relation to an application at Forstall Lane. Are any of the officers wanting to identify the course of action, or do you want me to just read as per the papers? So the Planning Committee at Maidstone, when they passed an application in relation to this site, expressed concerns about highways access, and whilst assurance was given that everything would be satisfactory, they asked that there would be a follow-up action after the development becomes live to actually show that what was forecast in terms of traffic safety and access does actually come to bear. So the solution to this is that we take that recommendation and we will add that to the work programme and bring it as a review report at an appropriate time in the future. Is that agreed by members? Thank you. Councillor Wilson. Is that...
The only thing that's being taken into consideration here is the right turn to prevent traffic going into Well Lane. Is that correct? So, can I take it that the Planning Committee and KCC are all quite content with all the traffic coming out of this Forstall Lane we'll call it the Forstall Lane development, will be exiting and entering via Forstall Lane and Stockett Lane?
I'm not familiar with the intimate details of that application, only that we've been asked to refer it or review it at a point in the future. So I don't know if Mr. Jarman might be able to give you some more detail.
Thank you.
Yes, one of the main discussion points when this was reported to Planning Committee at Maidstone for the second time, there was a lot of discussion on some Planning Committee members having concerns that drivers would still be able to turn right, even though, in my opinion, it was very difficult to do because the actual junction had been designed to encourage just left turns. And I'm sure the councillor knows that it's an extremely narrow road with hedges either side.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, the question was, can I take it then that the Highways and the Planning Committee are content with the exit and enter into the development via Forstall Lane and Stockett Lane? That's the answer.
I think what I have to say to you is it's not for this board to comment on that planning application or the decision that was made, right. But one may infer the fact that permission was granted. There must have been some degree of satisfaction, but we've just been asked to follow up on the basis of their recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most unsatisfactory.
Councillor Clark.
The papers mention that the exit from the development should almost be parallel. Specifically to that comment, I was the person that had raised that at the Planning Committee, and it was to draw attention to Old Loose Hill and High Banks, where the junction is such that as you come off of High Banks, you enter Old Loose Hill at a point where it's almost parallel, and it's very, very difficult to turn left into Old Loose Hill. And that's the reason why that was mentioned, so that it would be, as traffic leaves the site, they will almost be parallel with Forstall Lane, so they'd physically be restricted from turning towards Wells Street.
Thank you for that additional clarification. Thank you. We are at agenda item 13 now. This relates to the bridges gyratory system, and this is referred to us from a meeting of full council here at Maidstone, where concerns were raised in relation to the amendments to the gyratory system. Since we already have a review in our work programme, I think we just need to receive the reference and to incorporate this when that review comes up later in the year. So I don't think there's any further action we require. I believe that Councillor Harper, you wanted to speak on this item as visiting member. So now would be your opportunity to do so.
Thank you. I won't repeat all what was said, obviously, at the council meeting fairly recently in terms of this item. We had a discussion there. A few points to add, I think, especially to consider when you do look at any further reviews, is to bear in mind that in the integrated transport strategy, which the Borough Council has adopted as part of the local plan, there are aims to increase the number of people cycling and walking in the borough as part of trying to reduce the dependence we have in this town and borough on people driving. And I think it's inherent that we need to review the gyratory to make sure that it doesn't effectively preclude and deter people from either cycling into the town centre from the west side of Maidstone or walking into the town centre, which it currently has the impact of doing. When you talk to local residents on the west side of the town, they're actually being deterred from coming into Maidstone town centre, and they're saying because of the impact of the gyratory, which has made it slower for people driving to the town, let alone for pedestrians and cyclists. I mean, one point I was asked to raise tonight, also for consideration, is when looking at the review of the gyratory, if we can see specifically how we can improve it in terms of cycling access from Maidstone West Railway Station to the town centre, because clearly we're wishing to encourage people to use public transport and trains to get to Maidstone and then to either walk or cycle on from there. And at the moment, there's no signage and there's not an obvious route for cyclists to use. Another concern there's been is obviously the time the scheme took to go through, and there's still works which are actually being carried out as part of it. The Broadway subway is still under repair over a month after the works were supposed to finish. Signs went up there in the middle of September saying there would be repair works and refurbishment carried out for a 3-month period. Well, 3 months from the middle of September ran out over a month ago, and there's still half of it is closed off. Why, how long are those works going to take? The whole gyratory has been associated with delays and massive inconvenience, as I say, from people from the west side of Maidstone town. So we really want to see how, when a review is done, how it can be made better, because at the moment it's not working for half the population of Maidstone. And unless it is, we seem to have wasted, I don't know what, £3, £4, £5 million on a scheme which has only led to a deterioration of our environment and our town.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. I think there's probably two elements to what you were speaking to there. One is the follow-up review when officers will come back with some facts and figures, some actual data to see what the impact and the benefit has or has not been. But secondly, you did mention the issue of outstanding works. So what I'm going to suggest is I'm going to ask our clerk, who clerks Strategic Planning Committee, also to add that to our work programme, and we could follow up that aspect with simply a Maidstone hat on, but leave the two things separated. You're nodding, so hopefully that finds agreement with you. I don't think any other visiting member wanted to speak on this item, in which case we shall move on. Oh, sorry, yes, Councillor Lewis.
I fully support the motion. Asks, and Paul, Councillor, I didn't read it out, but it might is review the gyratory system to see how remedial access can be improved to improve cycling in it. That aspect of the motion, I fully support. But I notice in the report that it says the cycle route, the gyratory is not part of a designated cycle route. I just wonder if you could ask the KCC officer. I think there's two cycle routes, one that way and one that way, that cross the gyratory. So I've had site meetings with officers.
It might be better to wait until the full report comes and we consider its entirety. Mr. Boorman, are you placed that you could give a short response to that?
Yeah, just to give an update, the existing cycle network actually goes through the remaining subway that wasn't filled in as part of the gyratory scheme, and there was additional signage that was implemented as part of the scheme to divert cyclists to the lower end of the high street. Then the other way, it goes up the slope across St Peter's Bridge, across St Peter's Road, and then carries on up the hill, and that's remained as is and has been throughout the scheme and will continue to do so at this time.
I'll just ask that point is considered in the response.
Thank you. Councillor Daly, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I note the fact that we're going to have a serious review, and I'm very welcoming of that. But just to make these points, if I may, concerning the way in which it's been panned by some people so far. The gyratory system, I believe, actually is working now. It's been a long time in settling in. And all things that are new take some time to settle in. However, it was pointed out quite forcibly some time ago that much of the gyratory application will be hampered if the yellow box junctions are filled up with traffic because they can't get out at the other end. And they can't get out of the other end sometimes because the light system doesn't work in a wave system, although I believe that is even now being looked at. So all those things are to be brought into the review, and I feel that. But the question concerning yellow box junctions is something which is a festering sore. People are careless. They don't care because, one, if they get stuck in a yellow box junction, that's tough, and eventually it'll clear. In London, you couldn't do it. If you did it in London, you would get a £70 or £100 fine in the post in 2 shakes of a loan's time. And why is it, therefore, London always gets these benefits, and towns like Maidstone, where we have serious town centre problems, in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, if anything goes wrong, we have gridlock. But those yellow box junctions are the main problem for, at the moment, the non-application of the gyratory system as it was designed to be working. So that's that. And then there's the other little snag, isn't there, about the way people are still entering the northbound carriageway when they want to really go south. And that's because we've got a piddly little no entry sign, which is no bigger than 9 inches across, when it ought to be 21 inches across, and then people can actually see it. I won't go into the fact that we have this wonderful thing in this country of abbreviating town names on the roads. And when foreigners come here, I wonder where they think Hast is, or Wombwell is, or all these other places which are painted on the road, where we know it's Westmoreland or it's Hastings, but they don't. They've got a clue. And they follow the road system that they think it is. And at the moment, those are the things which need to be tweaked. But in generality, Chairman, I do believe that the gyratory system has not been a failure and can't be seen to be one of those. I have to say that Mr. Harper is very easy to come out with some statistics, but I doubt that half the population of Maidstone is concerned by this. Certainly crossing the road they are, but not half of the population. The other three-quarters, in fact, are in cars. Never mind. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Daly, and I think that is precisely why we are still waiting a little bit longer to receive that report, where we actually have a full annual cycle of movement statistics that we can actually analyse and quantify benefit or otherwise. Now, you did raise the issue of yellow box junctions. I think that's one of those proverbial chestnuts that we've covered more than once, and I'm hoping that perhaps Mr. Reid would be able to give you a succinct response here and now.
Succinct, yes, and it's not very helpful. We're not permitted to enforce moving traffic offences outside London. The government put a stop to that about 4 or 5 years ago. I think they were originally intending rolling out the powers to local authorities, but at the moment it's beyond our capability, I'm afraid.
Right, so bang up to date, that's the situation. Councillor Bird?
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that this is coming back in, hopefully in 2 months' time, so I'm not going to repeat what Councillors Daly and Willis have said, which I support. I do also believe that the gyratory has improved things. Now we've got rid of all the works on the embankment and the gas board and the waterworks and everything else. So that's good. One thing I do take issue with, and I do want to have reflected in the report, please, when it comes, is consideration of improving the refuge in the middle of Bishop's Way for pedestrians. I think that is one of the serious shortfalls of the current scheme, and I think it would be relatively easy to make that refuge 20-25% bigger, which would significantly enhance the safety of the scheme. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask that officers take those comments on board in anticipation of the report later in the year. Okay, I think that concludes us at that item. Councillor Chittenden?
Just two very quick points. One, to agree with Councillor Bird with regard to the refuse. I think that's absolutely right. It was a particular point that was raised on many occasions, and I don't think they've gone quite far enough as far as they can with regard to the pedestrian refuse. I think that is a good point that must be looked at. Just for clarification with regard to the gyratory and the improvement, at the last Quality Bus Partnership, I raised this with Arriva, who obviously regularly use it, and they were quite clear that the problems we now have were not related to the gyratory. It has been an improvement, but certainly with regard to the movement of their buses through the system. With regard to the London Road, it was generally for different reasons beyond the gyratory system on the London Road out to Ditton that were the main cause of their problems that they have on any delays at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Apologies if I'd missed you. There's a little trick to these things. If you put them at a certain angle, I can only see the clear bit, and it looks like you're invisible. So try and point the paper bit at me, then I shall see. Another invisible one. Back to you.
I think most of my points were covered, but I did provide feedback to officers on the safety at the gyratory, and I just asked that be considered as part of the review.
I'm sure that's noted. Right, nothing further on that. We will move on and we'll look forward to that review report in due course. We are next at agenda item 14. This is a petition report back from a petition that we'd received previously. Platts Heath Safe Transport Scheme. And is this Mrs. Watson? Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a very brief report, just to say, an update, just to say that we've met the petitioner and the local parish council. We've agreed that they will look at a highway improvement plan and we will then agree an action plan. And at the moment it is with the parish council and the petitioners to come up with that highway improvement plan. So as soon as we've got that, we can agree the way forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We like succinct like that. Does anybody wish to make a comment? I think this one's essentially good news. The petition was received. Officers are working with the parish council and it's an ongoing feast and it's a two-way communication. So can we agree to note that report? Is that noted? Thank you. Agenda item 15, petition report, this time relating to Hermitage Lane. And I think, Mr. Wright, are you going to? Oh, that's hiding from me. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. This report responds to a petition regarding the B2246 Hermitage Lane that was presented by Mr. Keith Young, whilst also providing a progress update on the local junction improvement schemes. The petition draws attention to how Hermitage Lane is a vital artery in the highway network. It raises the concern that the capacity of the road is already under pressure and will deteriorate further due to planned housing. It also draws attention to the congestion and delays that have been caused by roadworks. 4 requests are made of Kent County Council, which the report addresses in turn. The first of these is to declare that the B2246 has now reached its absolute traffic capacity. The County Council could not justify such a declaration, as traffic flow relative to capacity is influenced by a range of factors that vary along its length. Our ongoing approach to tackling congestion is focused on relieving the worst affected hotspots, so as to improve overall journey time reliability. The second petition request is for the County Council to do everything within its powers to minimise the disruption caused by roadworks on the B2246 and in the surrounding area. It is certainly the case that the County Council is already doing all it can to minimise disruption to road users. The recently completed retail park junction improvement works were the subject of careful management and publicity, and this approach will continue to be applied on future schemes. The third request is for the County Council to classify the B2246 as a high priority route and include it in the Kent Lane rental scheme with immediate effect. A proposal to include the route in the lane rental scheme was put forward at the meeting of the Highway Authorities and Utilities Committee held on the 9th of January. The proposal was supported and it has now been submitted to our gazetteer team for the updating of our system to enable future jobs to be warned prior to commitment. Finally, the fourth request is to carry out an urgent air quality investigation for both noxious fume and particulate levels along Hermitage Lane. As this is a Maidstone Borough Council function, with your permission, Chairman, I will invite Mr. Egerton to comment on this element.
Thank you. Mr. Egerton.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been in touch with Maidstone's environmental health officers and they've informed me that recent modelling work doesn't indicate that air quality on Hermitage Lane exceeds the national air quality objective. However, air quality monitoring tubes have recently been deployed on Hermitage Lane in order that the situation may be monitored. In addition to the above, Maidstone Borough Council has recently adopted air quality planning guidance that quantifies the scale of mitigation required from new developments. It will also be producing an air quality development plan document, a policy document, in order to address this matter further through future planning policies. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Do we have any visiting members that wanted to? A couple of reserved rights. Anybody intending to speak? No. Okay. Just for the record, Councillor Carter, welcome. We'll just note into the minutes that you've arrived. And for due diligence, Are there any declarations of interest or lobbying? We all noted that we'd been lobbied in relation to agenda item 17, so would it be appropriate to note that for you as well? That's the Sutton Road junction improvement matter. No? Not lobbied? Okay, so no lobbying, no declarations, just arrival. Thank you very much. That's now noted into the minutes. Members, if there are no... Councillor Bird, you are indicating... Do you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr Wright and Mr Edgerton, for your report. There's some good news and there's some disappointing news and a little bit of frustration. I'd just like to go through firstly the four elements of the petition. The first one about declaring that the B2246 has now reached its absolute traffic capacity. I've read paragraphs 2.3 and 2.4 more than once. I'm still trying to understand them. And the word that keeps springing to mind is called a bottleneck. We all know what a bottleneck is, and a bottleneck is a constraint on the capacity of a route. So if you have a bottleneck in one or two places in Hermitage Lane, that is a constraint on the whole of Hermitage Lane and, may I add, Fountain Lane, the whole of the B2246. So I find the idea that you look at the whole road and then say, well, there's plenty of capacity between points C and E, but we're not, so we'll disregard the bottlenecks at points B and H, as a little bit strange, because we know that there's bottlenecks, we know that we are trying to mitigate those bottlenecks, but there is a limit to what mitigation can be done. So I would like a little bit more explanation about just, what has to happen before something is accepted as being at full capacity. If we need the mitigation, we all understand that. But even then, there will be a capacity issue. And I just don't understand those two paragraphs. Moving on, the second point, to do everything within its powers to minimise the disruption. Well, I would like to congratulate Kent Highways on the work that was done in the Tunbridge and Morning end, the northern end of Hermitage Lane. I thought that project was really well run. We know it finished a week early, and there were a few teething problems right at the beginning, but thereafter, I think the disruption to traffic was effectively and efficiently minimised. So I think we all appreciate that. Item 3, the Kent Lane rental scheme, very good news. Yes, very pleased to hear that, and I hope that the paperwork can be wrapped up and implemented as quickly as possible. Mr Edgerton, I note your comments about 2.7, about the air quality. I just want to, we keep using this word Hermitage Lane, but we are actually referring to the B2246 in its entirety. My suspicion is that the worst air quality issues are actually at the very southern end of the B2246, where it actually is called Fountain Lane. So could we have confirmation that that is being monitored, because that is where you get the most queuing traffic trapped in between properties. And the last point I would like to reiterate, and I hope the board will, everybody will support me, is the suggestion that we should bring this forward to the work on the Duke of Edinburgh and Fountain Junctions. Anything that can be done to bring that forward, I would fully encourage, and I hope everybody in this board will endorse that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think some comments there to note, 2 points in particular. I don't know if Mr Wright can give some additional clarification on those two paragraphs. And then Mr Edgerton, whether you are able to confirm the location of the monitoring tubes.
Thank you, Chairman. The reference was made to bottlenecks. I mean, what I would say is it's exactly the bottlenecks that we are trying to tackle through the junction improvements. The way in which the petition was framed was to declare the entire route at capacity. So what the report is seeking to do is really say that there are a number of variables along a route that will alter the conditions that a road user will encounter. It'll be the volume of traffic, the composition of that traffic, the time of day that you're travelling, even the prevailing weather conditions. So there are a number of variables, but essentially what we're saying is that there are bottlenecks on that route, and that is what we're focusing on dealing with.
Thank you, Chairman. I propose to go back to the environmental health officers concerned and find out the location of the tubes, if that's okay with this House.
Okay, we'll follow that up. I seem to have a recollection that it was mentioned they are in the Fountain Lane location, but we'll get that confirmed. Councillor Willis, I think you're the only other person indicating.
On the 3 points I wanted to make, if possible, Chair, or 3 questions. 2 questions, 1 point, if possible. One is of the Maidstone officer about the point that Councillor Bird made. When you're looking at asking the question about the tube at the end, and I think the Chair is right in what he says, but we can clarify that. I've had a meeting with, unusually, I had a very informal meeting about cycling with T&M and Maidstone environmental officers together. Very informal, but it was actually about the effects of cycling. And an informal suggestion was made in that meeting that perhaps we should look at Hermitage Lane holistically. Bear in mind, nearly half of it is in Tunbridge and Malling, which is what this report does, and I congratulate, in actual fact, I want to talk about some of the elements, but actually it does talk about Hermitage Lane holistically. But most importantly, that informally in that meeting, it became obvious to me as one of the local members, and I'm happy to work with T&M local members to lobby for this appropriately, that a report on the whole of Hermitage Lane pollution-wise would be useful, including, we call it the 2246, including Fountain Lane, because at either end there's an AQMA. And one of the conditions of AQMA is we're supposed to try and discharge them by reducing pollution. If we're building more houses, and let's face it, Maidstone, we've built a building 1,000, some of which we had imposed upon us, and Tunbridge and Malling are likely to come up, look at something that they're trying to do at the other end of it, quite a lot of houses. At some point, it would be good if, Officer Edgerton, if we can look at a holistic do a report to look at Hermitage Lane and the future effect holistically, which also may guide our neighbouring council in their decisions about housing and policy. So that come up in a meeting. That's the first point. Could we add that to what the officer's looking at in terms of...
Well, if I come back to you on that, and then I'm going to ask Mr Jarman to elaborate, but I can tell you that the Cabinet member at T&M has been in contact with me directly this last week in relation to the duty of cooperation obligations, and speaking with officers, and I hand over to Mr Jarman now, that is in hand.
Yes. The relevant director at Tunbridge and Malling was in touch with me this morning with regard to the meeting that the chairman just mentioned. I would say as well that the government are proposing to raise the bar in terms of meeting the legal test, which is duty to cooperate, by requiring local planning authorities to show that they've considered joint planning. And Hermitage Lane, as Councillor Bird said, the B2246 seems a perfect example of where two authorities, dare I say it, 3 authorities, could work together.
That's really welcome. So, next 2 points are more about the work at the south end that would majorly benefit residents that have had to deal with the extra housing and existing congestion in that area. I'll aim, if I can ask them of the officer, but it may be the project officer, whoever, that this is about point 3 of the report, and I have had discussions before, but I would really like clarification on this. What method, so it mentions about a design statement. I think it's really important to local members and also the petition signatories. It mentions about June 2018, design work being done till June 2018, which seems acceptable. First of all, first question is, what method of design and research are we doing? Are we looking at the junction and the plans that DHA put forward, just those plans, or are we looking at a bigger scheme? I will remind people that the Fountain Pub, is now derelict again. It seems the business continuously goes bust. Are we looking at how wide is the remit in looking at that improving that polluted bottleneck? That's the first point.
Can I just add, I don't think we should get into too much of this micro detail, in as much as, I think it was our last meeting, we did in actual fact receive a report detailing the progress on these highways improvements as a group. And one of the things that was noted is that there are a number of them, and they're not all going to progress simultaneously, instantaneously. Nonetheless, if you're able to add any helpful comment, Mr. Borman.
Yeah, just to confirm the comments made. The feasibility work that was actually done on the junction at the Fountain Lane end of Hermitage Lane was actually given in quite an open book way. We didn't constrain ourselves to looking at any one particular design. We didn't constrain ourselves to any one particular format that had previously been presented. We actually looked at the whole of the area and what we could actually do if A, money were no object, B, land were no object, which is why we've now got a feasibility proposal that's going to be moving forward into the next stages of outline design, which incorporates the junction of Hermitage Lane, St Andrews, Heath Road, Fountain Lane and Tunbridge. It has actually been, we have been made aware that the pub is derelict, and again that's something that we could potentially look at moving forward. But as it stands, there was no set remit to constrain the design works that we've had undertaken. Obviously there are constraints there because it's a residential area, and we've got to look at all factors and take that into account. But currently we have a feasibility proposal that we feel that works, and that will be presented to members in the near future. I've already had a meeting with Mr Bird, and I will be arranging a meeting to go through the proposal.
Can I ask when that will be going out to public consultation? I've been asked that question by a few members of the public.
Yeah, once obviously the feasibility has gone over to the outline design, obviously we will engage with members and members of the public when we've got that design ready. So you're probably looking at the June deadline.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Last question, which is probably the most important one, and it was hinted at by Councillor Bird, and I don't think anyone, even our county members, have had an answer on this yet. The report says it's currently programmed for the year 2021, which is 2.5 years away. However, it may, or 2 years, 2.5 years away on average, it may be possible to bring this forward. Can I ask either the project officer or whoever wants to answer this question, why, and it does say, I appreciate it says, maybe have to bring this forward, but if you look at the petition and the attention that Hermitage Lane really requires, what constraints do we have, or what delays do we have that mean it's taking 2 years when, for example, the McDonald's works at the other end were agreed at this and planned within a year? What are the constraints that may take it 2 years, and can we bring it forward?
Mr Egerton.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr Jarman referred to the fact that there was liaison taking place with Tunbridge and Morling Borough Council at the moment. Tunbridge and Morling Borough Council are not in the same position as Maidstone in respect to their local plan. They're at an earlier stage, and they're undertaking early consultation and are moving towards a draft plan. It's important that the works which take place consider the extent of the growth, particularly local growth to Hermitage Lane, and as a result of that, we want to make sure that we do join up. We undertake our duty to cooperate with Tunbridge and Morling Council, along with Kent County Council, so that we consider the quantum of growth which is going to be taking place into the future, and that can help direct the nature of the scheme. Thank you.
Last comment on that then, if I can. The scheme, there's been a scheme and planning permission given for something for 2 years now. for the east and west of Hermitage Lane schemes that mentioned and contributed or are contributing towards this. There's also, I understand, local growth fund money. I hear what you're saying about T&M, but people are suffering delays up that end of the road at the moment. That's the more residential part of the road as well. What I would ask is, can that 2021 is unacceptable, and can we do everything we can working with Kent to make sure we bring that forward realistically to the next 18 months rather than 2.5 years?
I think we're sort of round up at that point, but you'll be able to monitor that duty to cooperate progress through strat planning where you're a member, so you're going to be well placed to do that. Councillor Carter, did you indicate?
I've pressed the button. Yeah, thank you. Very briefly, you asked me whether I'd been lobbied. I've been written to by a number of residents concerned with the traffic congestion, both in Hermitage Lane and on some of the stuff on the A274. I don't think it qualifies as being lobbied. They've written to me sharing their concerns, and as leader of Kent County Council as the Highways Authority, that is a normal course of business. I think both the petitions really articulate the fact that the capacity of many of the significant link roads in Maidstone are at their capacity and beyond their capacity, and if there is to be more residential development in Maidstone Borough to satisfy the Secretary of State, it's got to be through new communities that are intelligently located near to the rail network, near to the motorway network, and urban sprawl in Maidstone. We must let out the cry, enough is enough, and look at new developments in the way that we planned intelligently Kings Hill. Tremport are planning their new development, the other side of the new Halling Bridge, the Otterpool New Town in Folkestone and Hythe Borough, if their name changes to be approved by the Secretary of State, are perfect examples of well strategically planned new housing developments that probably across Kent, if we get our collective heads together, we can strategic plan the housing growth, give the government their housing numbers that they want without exacerbating the stress on the existing highway infrastructure in Maidstone, which has grown to its natural size, and there is no easy solution to the congestion problems if we don't get the acceptance of Maidstone Borough Council that superimposing yet more urban sprawl will affect and diminish the quality of life of all the residents of Maidstone. So I make that point on both this and the A274, where I think residents that live in my neck of the woods are feeling the pain day in, day out. Thank you, Chairman.
I think those comments are very useful, and as you say, given what the Secretary of State has suggested, I think now is the moment where our two authorities need to work together in a way like they never have done before, so that we actually do have a very joined up way of thinking and the strength of both authorities behind that to address this next review period that's forced upon us. So I think we'd all be unanimous on that. Councillor Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, I also welcome Councillor Carter's remarks. I mean, it was the way forward and is the way forward. And unfortunately, we didn't take that way forward 2 or 3 years ago. When you talk about the two authorities, Mr. Chairman, were you talking about Maidstone Borough Council and Kent County Council?
That was my direct reference.
Can I also say that we are also talking about Tonbridge and Malling Council, where Mr. Jarman said that they were raising the bar in terms of cooperation and the duty to cooperate. I mean, there should be no raising of the bar. The duty to cooperate has always been there. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened. And I think the difficulty is that if we are applying what Councillor Carter is recommending, then Tonbridge and Malling, who we've been told are at an earlier stage of their local plan, this should be taken into account with their housing numbers. And certainly Tonbridge and Malling can actually do something about it now. Maidstone can't.
No, I think that's a point very well made. The duty cooperation meetings are being formulated now, and county being part of that is absolutely instrumental. You know, together we can put a very cohesive rebuttal or plan, whatever the case may be, together. So, noted. I think everybody's had their turn on this. We're asked just to note the report. Is it noted? Thank you. Agenda item 16. This relates to the Gatland Lane work, and we've already agreed to take the earlier petition in conjunction with this item. And I think, is this you again, Mr Watson?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank the petitioners for their input into the consultation. This report has been brought to this JTB as a result of receiving objections to the consultation on parking restrictions in Gatland Lane, which took place between the 11th of August and 4th of September. The parking restrictions only relate to the opening of the Jubilee Primary School in September 2016 and not any later plans to increase pupil numbers, which was refused at the Planning Committee. A traffic regulation order consultation should have taken place prior to the existing yellow lines being placed on the ground, so the recent consultation has been done retrospectively. The lines were placed on the ground in advance of the legal order on safety grounds, although not legally enforceable. The objections to the consultation are listed in Appendix 4 and are primarily concerned with additional parking restrictions rather than the restrictions highlighted in the report, although there are comments regarding the double yellow line restrictions. In response to the consultation, KCC has reviewed the existing restrictions and proposes to keep the double yellow line corner protection restrictions, but remove the double yellow line restrictions between numbers 21 and 29 Gatland Lane, and replace those with a single yellow line waiting restriction to allow parking at weekends and out-of-school drop-off and pick-up times. Can I please ask you to note that the recommendation summary on the front page, that's page 21, bullet point 2, should read no waiting between the hours of 0800 to 1000 and 1400 to 1700 Monday to Friday, not the 0800 to 1700 Monday to Friday only. In the body of the report it's correct, it's just the summary on the front page is incorrect. The report recommends that option 1 be supported by the board, which is to accept all the listed recommendations, which are, and I'll briefly mention them, the double yellow line protection to the junctions of Ridgeway, Chamberlain Avenue, Burclere Drive, Gatland Lane vehicle entrance to Jubilee Primary School. 2, remove the double yellow line restriction outside 21 to 29 Gatland Lane and replace with a single yellow waiting restrictions between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. Monday to Friday to allow parking in the evenings and weekends. And additionally, to support the prohibition of stopping on the school keep clear markings on Monday to Friday between the hours of 8 and 9 and 3 and 4. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We've got visiting members wishing to speak on this. Councillor Harper, I know you definitely wanted to. Can visiting members just remind me if there's anybody else to speak on this item? Just Councillor Harper? Just Councillor Harper. Thank you.
Excuse me. I think I'm suffering from the bugs which are going on. On behalf of the residents, we'd like to thank the officers recommending the change from the double yellow lines to the single yellow lines. And I note the change which was just referred to for the recommendation, so that it actually coincides with the hours our petition was looking for. So I think that's a good sign of, the Kent County Council Maidstone listening to what local residents want. So I think, on behalf of residents, I'd like to thank you for that. A couple of things, I think, to bear in mind, in relationship to the Jubilee School and the impact on the local area, is that whilst residents would support the recommendations here, we need to be cognizant of the wider impact that the Jubilee School, at its current size, which is only with its first few classrooms in place, actually has had on parking in the local area. And if I could just suggest, if people could quickly turn to page 25, which is Appendix 1, which sort of gives a slightly wider map of the area. When you look at roads such as Chamberlain Avenue, Ridgeway and Cowdrey, they are now suffering very considerably from parking of staff based at the school who turn up at before 8 o'clock in the morning, and obviously don't leave until well after 5. And in particular, residents down in Ridgeway have raised with me concerns on ambulances actually accessing people with health problems, where they actually had a case where it was very difficult for an ambulance and subsequently a carer to actually go and provide support to someone because of the parking which is caused there. Clearly, residents hope that the current one-form entry is kept in force, but I'm aware, as of yesterday, that the Jubilee School actually has put in an appeal to the Planning Inspectorate, which will obviously be coming forward at some point, to have the Planning Committee's decisions reversed in respect of the building works and also of the ban on being a two-form entry. And clearly, if that were to be successful, we don't know, then I think we would need to look at the issues around parking and parking controls in the wider area around Gatland Lane. As I said, at the moment there's evidence that it's getting worse as the school's filling up to its one-form entry capacity. And so there is big concern, I think, what might be the impact if it went from one to two-form entry. But even at one-form entry, once in a year or two, when the school's, if you like, full at that point, I think we should look at a further review, because there are already further problems occurring in the Gatland Lane area. And bearing in mind, Gatland Lane is a bus route as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Carter, and then I shall move anti-clockwise as indicating.
Thank you, Chairman. I again have enormous sympathy with the residents and very much support the changes that have been made through the yellow lining. It was never our intent, Kent County Council, to build a school in this location. It was the men in bowler hats in Whitehall that decided this is where they were going to build a new school in Maidstone when we wanted it built on the other side of town. And it's caused us enormous inconvenience to parents, because we've got a shortage of places on the other side of town, close to Bearsted and Grove Green. And the prospect of turning it into a two-form entry actually is quite frightening. They acquired the site, they put in the planning application. We need a school, as I say, on the other side of town, and fast. And because it was a free school and the powers of deciding where that school was located was not the making of Kent County Council. So we are where we are. We've got a one-form entry primary school. I think we've got to look at produce the expansion where it is needed, not in this particular area of town.
Like you said, and it's not just the impact of perhaps additional staff parking when you've got the school the wrong side of town where it's needed. The congestion implication of transit one side to the other is perhaps that biggest issue that we're collectively battling with around this meeting room tonight. Councillor Bird, you're indicating.
Chairman, thank you. Firstly, it may not surprise you, but I agree wholeheartedly with what Mr. Carter has just said. And he knows that I do, because we've discussed this before. A couple of things about the report. Yes, generally I agree with the report, and I sympathise with the views which Councillor Harper expressed on behalf of the residents. Of course, this is a problem we have around a lot of schools. It's not just this one school. The two things. Firstly, I'm trying to get my head round the discrepancy between the hours of the single yellow lines and the hours of the zigzags. And I don't quite understand what the logic of that is, and if somebody can explain that to me, I'd appreciate that. Secondly, in terms, clearly on the corners we do need the double yellow lines. That should be at all times. That's a clear safety issue. In terms of the single yellow line on Gatland Lane extending south-westwards, it currently stops opposite Gatland House, or it is proposed to stop opposite Gatland House, at the boundary between numbers 29 and 31. Well, I drive this route quite a few times, and I suggest actually that parked cars are an issue, at 8:30, 8:45, are an issue further southwest of there. And can I ask if consideration was given to extending that single yellow line to the boundary of number 33 and 35 opposite where the traffic restriction starts on the north side of the road. Thank you.
Mr. Watson, are you able to help us there?
Thank you, Chairman. The school keep clear hours are just there to the minimum possible to prevent parking on there. So I don't have the exact detail on why they are different from the single yellow line, unfortunately. But I can hazard a guess it's just to put the minimum amount of restriction on that part of the network. And I don't believe any further consideration was given to extending the single yellow line beyond the boundary of 29 and 31.
I think they're direct answers to what you've asked. I mean, the fact that there's a mismatch of hours can have an implication to enforcement feasibility, can't it? Because you need officers there at different times. So, you know, if it has to progress as is because that's how the TRO is set out, but we may need to revisit that in the future, perhaps. Do you want to add any further comment, Councillor Bird?
Well, if it were possible at this late stage to propose extending it to the single yellow line to further southwest, I would like to do that, because I know that parked cars outside numbers 33 and 31 will cause an obstruction.
Is that possible to do, or do we require further consultation to make such changes?
Chairman, unfortunately, it would be extending the consultation, so we would have to go out to reconsult on extending it.
So I think we're heading towards take what's certain and on the papers, but, you know, future review and future further extension is a process that is available. Councillor Willis, are you wishing to add more?
I'm also going to agree with the leader of the County Council about the effect of these schools. I'm not going to mention any party names, but I would just ask, the nightmare we've had with planning with the Jubilee School and the Technology School, which we both worked on and had all sorts of difficulties, wonderful schools they may be, but the planning process, the government at the moment, without mentioning it, is looking at expanding the free school programme. I would ask the 11 members of the government party that were on this committee to be frank, please do what you can to lobby to look at the free school programme. It doesn't help us. It really, I don't think unplanned schools really help in this manner. And I think the way that we're doing it at the moment, we could do far better. And I think the leader of the County Council may be doing work on that. But please, all of you, do that, because we could do far better.
Chairman, can I just respond to that? I mean, I wrote to Justine Greening as Secretary of State for Education before she moved, and have now sent a letter to her successor asking the strategic planning of schools to be given back to upper-tier authorities, because it's not just in Kent that bad decisions have been made. I could give you a whole list of poor decisions that have been made around the country.
Right, I think that concludes the debate. So we just need to lend our support to the recommendation per the papers. I think it's set out in detail on page 21, but with the amendment in relation to hours as was described to us. So from the Chair, can I move that we support that recommendation? Do I have a seconder? Right, agreed. I think that's unanimous. Let's crack on. Agenda item 17, A274 Sutton Road junction improvement. Mr. Boorman, if you would introduce this, then we have a couple
Chairman,
of... Councillor Cook?
I'm not familiar with the Maidstone Borough constitution as far as this is concerned, but normally, as I think that one is able to move a motion at any time whilst the item is being considered. And if you would like me to move what I wish to move as a motion now, I will do so. Or if you wish to have Mr. Boorman introduce the item first, I'll come in as soon as he's finished with a motion then, please.
I will not prohibit anybody moving a motion at any time relevant, but it would perhaps be sensible to hear the proposal and demonstrate that we come to this with an open and not a predetermined mind. So let's hear the proposal And then I think there are also two members of the public that will wish to speak, and then it might be appropriate then to move something. Mr. Boorman.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I'd like to apologise for the late amendment that came through. Unfortunately, the first draft of the report was sent in error, so I apologise for that. This report is in relation to the junction improvement on the A274 Sutton Road at its junction with Wellington Street and Wallace Avenue, and is a request for an update to the board following public engagement that was held from the 18th of August and then subsequently on the 1st of December. First public engagement was held, as I've said, on the 18th of August, which allowed the project team an opportunity to engage with the local community on the proposed realignment of the junction and understand their concerns. Feedback from this engagement event, combined with a number of responses that were received to our dedicated email address, identified and highlighted four main themes of concern that you can see within the report in 3.9. This generated us undertaking additional work to the indicative layout that was first proposed at the JTB, and mitigation works were carried out on the points raised by the local community. As I've said, a further engagement event was held on the 1st of December, and I will update members on the outcome of that and the feedback. Just to give some context and some background to this scheme, in 2014 there were three separate planning applications that were granted for the following sites that have been identified within the report. These have had unilateral undertakings agreed and signed by Kent County Council, Maidstone Borough Council and the respective developers. Maidstone Borough Council's local plan was also adopted in October 2017, and there are an additional 2,651 homes to be built in the Strategic Policy SP3 Criterion 3I. All three undertakings agreed mitigation measures that were required at the Wellington Street and Wallace Avenue junction of the A274. They comprised of the widening of the Sutton Road on the southern side to accommodate 2 lanes of traffic in both directions on the link between Wellington Street and Wallace Avenue, the widening of the westbound Sutton Road approach arm to provide 3 lanes at the stop line, the widening of the eastbound Sutton Road approach arm to accommodate the additional westbound lane, and the linking of the controllers of the 2 junctions to improve the efficiency of the whole intersection. In 2015, this Joint Transportation Board agreed to progress works at locations which have been identified within your report, and those package of schemes, as we've previously discussed this evening, are known as the Maidstone Integrated Transport Package. Part of that package is the scheme that I'm reporting on this evening, the 274 Sutton Road junction with Wellington Street. In March 2016, approval was given by the Cabinet Member for Planning, Highways, Transport and Waste to deliver the improvement at both ends of Wellington Street, Maidstone. The layout that received the key decision in March 2016 also required removal of highway vegetation. This means the cherry trees that front Bell Meadow on the approach to Wallace Avenue. Even with a lesser scheme, which was the indicative scheme that was agreed at the E&T and by the JTB, cherry trees would need to be removed to accommodate additional lanes. During the development of that scheme, the initial design of the A274 junction was found to reach saturation point within the first year after construction, i.e. it would not fulfil the operating capacity benefits. Therefore, we needed to redesign necessary to ensure the scheme delivered the required benefits. This meant the increasing capacity and reducing congestion. The revised layout was presented to residents at the August 2017 engagement session, and 4 common themes were identified. Firstly, that the scheme would not achieve the benefits that it set out to do. Secondly, the concerns that the scheme would impact the vegetation fronting Bellmeadow and Sutton Road service roads. Thirdly, the scheme may increase noise and air pollution. And lastly, the scheme would result in the devaluation of the residents' properties. Having taken all of those concerns on board, extensive design work has been undertaken following the public engagement with a view to addressing the concerns while still demonstrating a value for money scheme. Public engagement again was held on the 1st of December at St Martin's Church, and KCC officers gave a presentation to the local residents which detailed the mitigating measures that had been designed following the August engagement event. You can see within the report a summary of leaflets that had been delivered and also the number of people attending and number of responses received, not only to us directly on the day, but also to the dedicated email address. Responses from the 1st of December have been collated and you can see those in Appendix 3 of the report. The mitigating measures, I'm going to play you a clip. Obviously, the first one was regarding the scheme and the benefits. So if I can play this clip whilst I also talk. You can see 2 scenarios. There's the top scenario is the do-nothing scenario. The bottom scenario is the proposed scenario up to 2029. What you can actually see is the A274 corridor moving out away from the Wellington Street junction, and in one moment you'll see a red car appear in both scenarios in the top right corner. What this is actually representing is the difference in doing no scheme in 2029 and actually constructing the scheme in now, and obviously the benefits that you will receive by 2029. As you can see now, the red car has come into play in the top scenario, and obviously in the bottom scenario is moving quite freely along the 274 corridor. Oh, that's it. Oh. That's not me. There you go. Got it. The benefits that will be realised by the completion of the junction improvements can be seen. Unfortunately, not in the table below, but they have been identified as 14 and 13 minutes respectively, and that's actually on the main corridor going through the A274 left to right and right to left, and they are a maximum of 14 minutes and 13 minutes. Is it still working? As you can see, the proposed scenario, the vehicle travelling through the junction already, whereas in the top scenario, it's not even reached the BP garage. So you can see that the difference in the proposal against the do-nothing. I'm going to just let that play because it plays for about 3 minutes, and I shall carry on with the other concerns that have been raised. Understandably, one of the other concerns raised by the local residents was the loss of vegetation.
Could I ask people just to listen for a little bit longer?
Second concern was regarding the loss of vegetation, and we've engaged an extremely competent landscape architect who's used to working in the urban environment and actually dealing with situations that we find ourselves in at this particular location. and he was challenged to produce a sympathetic planting regime that complements the overall scheme. He came back with two options for proposals for the actual landscaping and replanting once the scheme has been completed, and they're currently known as Option 1 and Option 2, and I'll briefly run through both options. Just as a point of note, within both options, the landscaping fronting the Sutton Road service road is exactly the same. There's no difference in planting for that area in either option. Option 1, fronting Belmeadow Service Road, was quite a challenge, as I'm sure you can understand, because the carriageway widening does remove an amount of the highway verge. Planting, let's finish anyway now. Planting was limited to the amount of space that was actually available to us to be able to plant anything on scheme completion. Therefore, there would be a section of Belmeadow that would only have an acoustic fence visible, whereas either end would have an amount of planting put back within Option 1. Option 2, we've actually looked to try and increase the amount of planting that we can get within the proposal and to try and mitigate the majority of the concerns from the residents of not only Belmeadow but obviously from Sutton Road itself. So we have proposed to implement some passing bays within Belmeadow, thus reducing the width of Belmeadow but allowing us to fully screen the Belmeadow Service Road and Sutton Road from each other, creating a kind of avenue effect with planting moving forward. The disadvantage of this proposal is that we would need a traffic regulation order for the length of the curb build-outs only to be able to, for ease of vehicular movement. The third concern was regarding the increase in noise and air pollution, and if I can just deal with those separately. Air quality diffusion tubes are actually located in the vicinity of the junction improvement. One is actually directly on the junction of the A274 Sutton Road and Willington Street. And we've taken advice directly from a senior scientific officer, and they have confirmed the following. Based on recent measurements of nitrogen dioxide combined with dispersion modelling, we are confident that the area of exceedance of the air quality objective does not extend beyond the edge of the carriageway at present and decreases rapidly the further the distance away from this. Under the current scheme, the facade of the house closest to the carriageway is circa 25 metres. Using DEFRA's NO2 fall-off with distance calculator, this suggests a level of 22.5 micrograms per cubic metre in that location. Under the new scheme, the edge of the carriageway to the facade of the same house would be estimated 16 metres, worst case scenario. The calculator indicates that the level of NO2 will increase to 23.9 micrograms per cubic metre, which is still well below the air quality objective. Therefore, it can be concluded that the scheme will not have a significant impact on air quality, and it will be below the standard set in the air quality objective. Second part of the noise and air pollution was regarding the noise quality. A sound survey was undertaken on the 14th of July 2017 where receptors were placed along the A274 corridor. Using the results of the environmental sound survey and then computer software, the model has been used to assess the noise levels as a result of the road widening works and calculate the effectiveness of any potential mitigation measures. The report concluded the initial assessment that the change in the initial assessment that the change in sound level associated with the widening of the A274 Sutton Road is likely to result in an increase of less than 3 decibels at dwellings on Old Sutton Road, described as negligible impact. The works are likely to result in an increase greater than 3 decibels at dwellings on Bell Meadow, described as a minor impact. An acoustic fence has therefore been incorporated within the design for the southern Bell Meadow side of the A274. The report further concludes it is understood that the retaining wall is to be built on the south of the road, replacing the existing earth bank. It is recommended that an acoustic fence is erected on top of the proposed retaining wall located along the southern edge of the A274 Sutton Road and parallel to the pathway edge. This is likely to reduce the magnitude of impact to negligible. It must also be noted that following on from the December engagement session where residents felt that potentially the acoustic fence could be extended, this is an absolute possibility, and we've actually started looking at how we can further extend that. Members must note that these sound survey and air quality do not include the proposal for the landscaping and planting regimes, and therefore can be assumed will be improved upon. Lastly, the concern regarding the devaluation of property. As mentioned earlier, residents are entitled to claim through the Land Compensation Act 1973 Part 1, and we agreed at the engagement session that specific newsletters would be distributed to members of the public to allow them to go through the process step by step. I now come on to one of the amended sections. In the previous JTB, we were asked to look at the bus prioritisation possibility at this particular junction and others within the Maidstone Integrated Transport Scheme. I can confirm that additional modelling work has now been undertaken to assess the benefits of the bus prioritisation and see whether it has a detrimental effect to the overall capacity benefits of the scheme. By bus prioritisation, I mean transponders within the fleet of transport operators within the buses. As they approach the traffic signals, they would detect that bus. They would rephase the traffic signals, giving the bus a green light, allowing it to go through on a green light. This does not mean the introduction of a bus lane. To confirm, it has been demonstrated that this system would not have a detrimental effect to the travelling public and actually could benefit those travelling in close proximity to the bus. It must also be noted that the bus prioritisation scheme cannot be implemented without the widening works due to the current congestion. In conclusion, in order to achieve the traffic benefits in terms of reducing congestion and increased capacity in mitigation for the new housing developments, this scheme needs to be implemented. Measures have been outlined in this report that mitigates the residents' 4 common concerns. However, the loss and replacement of vegetation remains a particular concern to the local community. Mitigation proposals were presented at the engagement event and can be achieved via the one of 2 options which I've already detailed. Following that engagement event in December, 9 responses were received by the 8th of December 2017. 6 responses did not indicate a preference for either option, but 3 have responded that they do not favour option 2 proposal. We feel that this does not reflect the majority of response in relation to the number of residential properties that front the proposed scheme, predominantly on the southern Bell Meadow side. Option 2 offers the greatest opportunity to replace vegetation while screening the A274 Sutton Road. It is therefore recommended that option 2 is implemented in a temporary measure for a 6-month period during the construction phase. This would require a temporary traffic regulation order for the duration, with communication continuing with residents to gain their feedback if this option should be introduced as a permanent feature, allowing the additional planting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reid, do you want to add anything to that? Mr. Edson?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to advise the Board of the planning framework that will form a context for the ultimate decision by Kent County Council in regards to this junction. In summary, there is a framework in place regarding the principle of this junction improvement. As noted by Mr. Borman, the Maidstone local plan is adopted and is premised on a spatial strategy, a distribution of the growth that we are forced to accommodate, we are required to accommodate, and site allocations have resulted from this. Another part of the local plan is to ensure that the impact of the growth is mitigated. Schemes are at different stages, Mr. Borman's referred, in terms of coming forward. The traffic increase from these developments, however, will happen. In terms of the mitigation of the impacts, Willington Street, Wallace Avenue is specifically referred to in the local plan as noted, and particularly in the infrastructure delivery plan, the reference being HTSE2. The junction and the framework that relates to this junction are, a justification and framework relating to this junction are provided. In addition to SP3 and Part 3 of that policy in the local plan, the scheme is then referred to in the reason justification to policy SP23 on sustainable transport in the local plan itself. So the principle of the scheme is set within this document. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jarman?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As Mr. Borman pointed out, we have a strategic policy for the southeast of Maidstone. And as has been pointed out by the petitioner, a lot of houses have been built very recently along the A274, and more have been permitted. So, the actual number is 2,651, which I would have thought in anybody's book is a lot of houses on an already congested road. So it seems to me very obvious the need to improve that road. So SP3 is obviously in our local plan, which is adopted very recently in October 2017. And what we say, and which was endorsed by a government inspector, an independent government inspector, is criterion 3, I quote, because I think it's important, key infrastructure requirements for the Southeast Strategic Development location include Roman numeral 1, highway and transport infrastructure improvements, including junction improvements to the A274 Sutton Road, incorporating bus prioritisation measures. And the scheme KCC highway engineers are coming up with is clearly in accordance with that recently adopted policy. Thank you.
Mr. Fitzpatrick, anything further to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My response is partly in response to various questions which were asked of me by the Chairman previously. Obviously, what you've got here is you've got a number of petitions saying we don't want it. We've got a Kent County Council report which says to approve. And if we look at kind of like the history of this, from Kent County Council's own reports, they are saying we welcome the scheme and there were no comments made in discussion that would affect the decision to be taken. Approval was given to enter into local growth fund funding agreement and enter into construction contracts as necessary for the delivery of the scheme. There's an acknowledgement that the Willington Street Junction Improvement Scheme forms the first part of the Maidstone ITP. And it's also an acknowledgement that this is an important scheme to help reduce congestion on the Sutton Road corridor, the A274 strategic route. Part funding for that has also been obtained from various Section 106 planning obligations. Now, as I said, part of the response which I've given arose out of some of the Chairman's questions. So we've taken advice, and I'm going to advise as follows. The County Council's legal advice in relation to diverting Section 105 funds to work relating to Relief Road is incomplete and out of date since the local plan's inspector's findings and the uncontested adoption of the plan, i.e. there is no challenge to any of the highways policies or housing allocation policies in the plan. 2. A decision to divert the Section 106 funds away from the A274 mitigation schemes is unlawful in the light of the fact that the independent person, i.e. the local planning inspector, has found that a bypass will not mitigate the A274 corridor traffic significantly. The inspector has indicated... Sharon? The inspector has indicated that even if a relief road was even delivered, it would not provide significant transport capacity improvements to the Sutton Road corridor. 3. Given the County Council's views on the highway implications of development in the southeast of Maidstone had fully been heard and rejected by an expert independent arbiter, Kent County Council do not retain the right to maintain and act upon its original opinion that a potential bypass scheme could be a real alternative. 4. There is no rational basis upon which to decide not to carry out the Wellington Street works. They will help to achieve the aims of all Kent County Council and Maidstone Borough Council's transport strategies and plans and will help improve air quality. It would be perverse not to carry them out. The independent local plan inspector found the following. The possibility of achieving a relief road does not justify abandoning the other identified mitigation measures on the A274, such as Wellington Street, as these are already available to implement and in a much shorter time frame. The argument that other road users would be disadvantaged if a bus lane or bus priority measures went ahead is not supported by any evidence. It is unreasonable for Kent County Council not to proceed with the mitigation measures on the A274, given that was the basis upon which several housing permissions were allowed. To divert the Section 106 funds to a study of a relief road could result in no mitigation whatsoever for the A274. This would plainly result in unacceptable congestion. The relief road would not provide significant transport capacity for vehicle movements between the town centre and southeast Maidstone. The relief road would not promote sustainable travel. The mitigation measures identified on the A274, including Wellington Street Junction improvements, would be effective in reducing congestion. They would also accord with a raft of policies and objectives of the County Council and the Borough Council. And lastly, bus priority measures on the A274 are needed to improve air quality and to reduce traffic congestion. The Borough Council has recently, as recently as October 2017, adopted housing allocations for several housing sites along and close to Sutton Road, which expressly require Wellington Street, Wallace Avenue and Sutton Road capacity improvements and bus prioritisation measures on the A274. These policies must be given full weight, and it would be perverse to make a decision not to proceed with the Wellington scheme in these circumstances. Whether each developer of the 2014 planning permissions does not object to his highway and contribution being used towards the possible relief road is irrelevant. It is not lawful to continue to block the A274 improvements.
Right. That gives us background information. It's for information only, and we've heard all of the officers speak. I've got some members indicating, though we do have members of the public wishing to make statements. Councillor Hodson is...
Chairman, point of clarification. First of all, sorry, excuse my answer, I apologise for that. I do not know who this position is. I'm assuming he's a solicitor for the Borough Council.
That is correct.
Fine, thank you. He made reference very early on that he has taken advice. I'd like to know who he's taken advice from. I'd like to know on whose instructions he took that advice. I cannot believe we've not got a copy of that advice before us this evening. And I think, fourthly, with the greatest respect, most of what has been given in that advice is irrelevant to this paper. This paper is talking about a junction, of which Kent County Council has not said no to, and is not wanting to divert monies on this particular subject. So I'm needing answers very clearly on those 4 questions, Chairman.
It's my understanding that the... Well, let me just say with regard to the advice, my understanding that this is advice, and I think the opening statement said that the county position had previously disagreed, that actually was sought at around the time of the examination in public. So what we've heard is just a recap of the legal scenario with relation to the what the inspector said as a result of the examination. That's my understanding. And members, so all of this is ultimately going to be opinion, but we've heard it. What degree of weight or notice we give it is a matter for members. Councillor Cook.
Thank you.
Oh, I'll say it again. It wasn't... no, I don't think very much of you. No.
At least I don't leave my umbrella at meetings.
I think the world of you, Chairman, and your chairmanship is excellent. But I'm not sure those 4 points have been answered. Who gave an instruction to Maidstone's Borough Council to seek advice? And for what reason? I think your explanation there, we're not on this particular paper. There's no punch-up yet. We've not said as Kent County Council, to my knowledge, we are against this. 2 years ago, Tom, Dick and Harry and Bill and Fred all said yes to this.
Let me put it in very simple terms. The question that I raised relates to page 45, 3.3. Can you give me some clarification about this? Because I was struggling to understand how 3 parties could be unilaterally signed up, right? I asked the time and we've been told how the clock works. That, I think, is what happens here. Right? But it was clarification of that, and I am not certain that 3.3 is factually correct, whether all parties are signed up. So I asked a very simple question and we got a very expansive answer. I suggest that we move on to the substance of the matter in front of us.
I take what you say, but I have to put your notice that I should be requesting from Maidstone Borough Council specific answers. Who gave that officer instructions to seek advice? Who gave him that advice? And why that advice, because it's a fairly important issue, is not before members, because it was quite detailed, but listening to it verbatim is not good enough.
Right. We'll pick that up on another occasion, and the matter of legal privilege I'm sure you're very familiar with, which may come into that. Councillor Cook?
Yeah, just on, I take on board everything Councillor Mr Hotson's just said. I think if we're dealing with just the formalities elements of this, I think it's also important to note that whilst decisions have been made by the Cabinet Member for Planning, Highways, Transport and Waste at Kent County Council, this is another decision that awaits the new Cabinet Member for Planning, Highways, Transport and Waste, Mr Mike Whiting, and he will be required to make a decision on this. That is a decision for Kent County Council as the Highways Authority, and based on questions that I have asked at committee at Kent County Council, the provisions of the local plan may guide and help and assist Kent County Council in its considerations of highways matters, but we are not bound by those plans. And it will be for Kent County Council to assess and come up with a plan. Eric has made the point already, Chairman, that no one's saying no to this yet, and I think. Do you wish me to put forth the motion now?
I would like to take the members of the public statements first.
Very happy.
Let's move to that.
Very happy so to do, sir.
Mr. Jeeves. And if I can remind you that you have 3 minutes and there's a useful indicator in front of you. Over to you.
I have no doubt that the junction will need improvement as traffic increases, but the plans put forward today are not the answer. In my opinion, they go directly against Maidstone's low emission strategy. They're dangerous, insufficient and illegal. Firstly, on pollution. The report in front of you today correctly states that nitrogen dioxide rapidly dissipates at the edge of the carriageway and estimates by the time it reaches the nearest house, the NO2 level will be below the EU directive. This is true, but irrelevant. The appropriate EU directive makes no mention of houses in relation to NO2. Distance is not a factor at all. Currently, this junction does not breach the EU directive for NO2 pollution, but your scientific officer confirms in the report that if it goes ahead, it will do. DEFRA guidance on this issue states that it is the LA's responsibility to aim to adhere to the law when the project falls within an air quality management area, as this project does. Today, you are responsible for advising if a new road should break the law and impact mine, my family's and my neighbours' health. The report has not addressed all concerns raised by residents. By moving the Sutton Road close to Belmeadow, vehicles will be on the wrong side of each other, only a footpath apart. Blinding from headlights is dangerous. In the UK, headlights are pointed to the left-hand or near side to avoid this exact issue. The proposal suggests a widening of the carriageway for less than 150 metres. The project team have been unable to demonstrate a precedent for such a short distance, nor any data showing this could even improve traffic flow. The proposal shows an extended right turn into Willington Street when travelling into town. This is misleading. The new right turn lane is roughly 3 car lengths longer only. A large proportion of westbound traffic turns right into Willington Street, and at peak times, the ahead lane is often blocked due to traffic exceeding the filter lane. How can an extra 3 car lengths be enough for the increased traffic? Under the proposals, we will simply see 2 unused lanes at peak time instead of 1. Neither option is supported by the residents. The lack of feedback after the second meeting just goes to show how bad engagement and understanding has been throughout. It is most certainly not an endorsement of option 2. There are many ignored factors which affect traffic flow, which I hope to have given out to people as they came in. Bus stops that aren't taken into account, unused bus stops that are getting lay-bys. Traffic entering Gore Court Road blocks the carriageway, not taken into account. Wallace Avenue traffic at the BP garage blocks the carriageway. Today, I only have time to inform you of the problems, but alternative suggestions for improvements have been made. Some of these can be found at the end of the report. Residents and councillors alike hope that local knowledge and common sense can prevail, and a recommendation to re-evaluate the project is passed, not least to stay within the law. Thank you. 3 seconds.
Thank you. Brilliant timing. There's a second speaker, Mr. Smith-Lowther.
Good evening to all councillors and members of the public. This is a unique chance for a council committee to listen and react to a valid plea. I have lived in this area for over 50 years. There is no traffic congestion except at peak times. The critical surveys that you have been presented with were completed when Langley Park was being built. The present bus lane has been unusable for 4 weeks because of lack of maintenance. This whole project is, as you have seen, computer generated and has not been site visited by the 8 people on the team, nor do they travel through the area on a regular basis. The information that I've just given you was given at a public meeting. To date, no letters have been answered questioning their decisions. Balfour BT have agreed on a recent 2-week survey that there is no congestion in the area and that the total money would be better spent on the Leeds-Langley Relief Road. They also pointed out the traffic lights had been badly installed initially and were not sensitive to traffic movement.
This is especially with regard to movement out of Wallace Avenue. This area is the last tree-lined approach to Maidstone. It was a historical site in Roman times, and shepherds went up Willington Street to the Downs, and carts took goods up Sutton Road into Maidstone and Rochester. It has been renamed Sutton Woods, but not for much longer, as 240 antique and mature trees are to be felled along with hedges and 30-foot high shrubbery. The oaks, ashes, beeches and hornbeams will be butchered. There will be no refuge left for the long-eared and pipistrelled bats. This is vital. The travellers' people will be distraught when their waymarker tree is destroyed, and relatives in the 60s who buried their loved ones' ashes under the oaks will be rightly up in arms. These trees predate the 1914-18 war and were dedicated to the RAF who fought the Battle of Britain over them in the summer of 1940. We are in possession of a video of those trees in full leaf. We are merely asking for 1 year's deferment and reference back so that the public can be consulted and properly informed. Various organisations, Land Registry was not informed, the Department of Transport has not been consulted, Greenpeace and 38 Degrees are interested and very concerned. No successful junction modification has yet been effected in Maidstone. I give it as an example Wat Tyler Way and the north end of Hermitage Lane.
If I can ask you to draw to a conclusion.
I hope you will refer this back and give us 1 year's grace, because we will have 9 months of hell. I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for addressing the board. It would probably seem appropriate to start with you, Councillor Cook, because you had earlier indicated you wanted to. Sorry, visiting members first. Start with you, Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members of the public. I'll be brief because I can tell that Councillor Cook is itching to get going with a motion here. There's not a lot more I can actually add anyway to what has already been said by our two wonderful speakers and the presenter of the petition this evening. There are a plethora of reasons why people in the local area around this proposed junction improvement are opposed to it. I won't go into all of the detail of all of them, and the thing that concerns me most is actually this real disconnect between public opinion and the proposal on the table that we seem to have reached a complete impasse on that. And it's not for the wanton of trying on either side. I don't think there have, as we've heard outlined, been public consultations, but I've been at those, and I'm sorry to say they've been pretty poorly managed, and the information has been, well, very little of it has been properly passed across or absorbed. So I would just like to wrap up by saying I would implore you at this committee, you have an opportunity, as has already been pointed out, to actually observe public opinion here. I would implore you not to fail the people that have made representations to you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. As with Councillor Burton, I shall be very brief because most of what I was going to say has been said. I fully appreciate and support the action of the residents, and I urge members of this committee to reject this.
Thank you. Just confirming no other visiting members wishing to speak. Back to you, Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendation that I wish to put forward as a motion reads as follows. Maidstone Joint Transportation Board recommends this scheme be not accepted as currently proposed and recommends that KCC be asked to amend the scheme to a much smaller scale, retaining the grass verges and as many trees as possible whilst paying attention to local pinch points or bottlenecks. I'm going to leave that's the motion there. It leaves it open for the officers to come back with a smaller scheme. I think we have to accept that something's got to be done. But the problem we have is the level of engineering that is being brought. I mean, there's an old saying in terms of a hammer to crack a nut. We do have congestion during during peak times. But during peak times, people aren't turning left into Wallace Avenue, they're coming out. So the more sort of left-hand turnings, and Willington Street, actually during peak times, can be congested from one end, literally, to the other. As I said earlier, Chairman, this is a decision that will need to be taken, and KCC Cabinet Member for Planning, Highways, Transport and Waste will make that decision following recommendations both from this board and the Cabinet Committee at Kent County Council. I have to say I attended both of the engagement events, and I do recognise that the officers have tried to mitigate members of the public's concern. So I thank them for that. Nevertheless, the priority here, and it comes through very, very clearly, is that those concerns are coming in as secondary to the necessity for what is perceived as this is what we have to deliver. I don't think that's right. I think there needs to be more of an even consideration between the impact on local residents and the need for highway improvements. I would like to say one thing in conclusion, Chairman. I don't recall a programme like this coming to us with multiple petitions totalling over 900 signatures, which includes every single resident in Belmeadow, bar one, and every single resident along the Sutton Road that is affected. There is no support for this amongst local residents at all, not one little bit. I beg to move the motion, and I hope the board will join me in asking the officers to think again. Thank you.
I'm going to ask that members of the public don't applaud every statement from this point on. Otherwise, I think we'll be here all night. But your support for what has been said has been noted. I think it's quite clear what you're suggesting there, Councillor Cook. I'm just wondering if we could turn that into a fairly immediate question, whether Mr. Borman is able to give a view on whether he thinks it is possible to have a cut-down scheme that achieves its objectives.
Unfortunately, the answer is no. Even in the indicative scheme that was first presented and proposed in 2015, there was an element of the highway grass verge between the A274 and Sutton Bale Meadow that required to be removed, as did the existing cherry trees. And that was found not to give the benefits that we require. So to not take any highway land for a scheme at this particular junction, you just wouldn't receive the benefits that would be required moving forward.
Can I just come back to you, Councillor Cook? Yeah, once, then we'll move on. Can I just come back on that? I recognise, and I think we all recognise, there may be a need to take a degree of vegetation, but it's not the issue of whether that some vegetation is taken to facilitate this. The issue is the degree, and that's why I left the wording in the way that it is, that they come back with a small scheme. Could I just add, Chairman, just very, very briefly, in terms of the earlier scheme that Mr. Borman was referring to, the plans that were presented at that time were in a very low, in terms of the scale, was quite small. It was very difficult to see from the plans as they were presented then what was actually entailed. But I do recall what was stated in the officer's report at that time, and that stated quite clearly that all of the road modifications and improvements could be contained within the existing curtilage of the highway. Now, you know, maybe I forgive me for being somewhat naive, but I didn't realise that we had 14 cherry trees in the middle of the highway. I didn't realise that we had oaks and all the other trees that were referred to earlier in the middle of the highway. I thought the highway was the curb from one side of the road to the curb on the other side of the road, plus maybe a metre. And I think a lot of other members. So I don't think it was fully appreciated at that time that the degree of take that was being required. Even so, that was the decision then. We have to make a decision now, and my recommendation is as stated. Thank you, sir.
I remember those meetings and those discussions, and I actually remember highlighting with certain other colleagues around this table what was actually involved, but perhaps we didn't really take on board what was being said at the time. I'm eager to try and pick up a couple of the points that the questioners, or the people that made statements, posed as well. And there was some concern about air quality issues and whether we were addressing those properly. So I'm looking around the table to see if any officers will be able to, I think that somebody might be able to put some light onto that. There was some querying of whether actually fundamentally the flows did improve or not, and maybe we could get something specific to that. And there was mention of 240 trees being felled, and maybe we ought to just clarify whether that's actually correct or not. So if officers do just gather a few moments to think of those responses, and we'll actually start going around the table logically. So I'm going to start with Councillor Cumming and then move around anti-clockwise and let people have their say.
Thank you, Chairman. Beginning of last week, we received this 81-page agenda covering all the aspects of this evening's meeting, of which 23 pages were detailed information on this item 17. Now, on page 50, paragraph 7.4 recommends option 1. When we arrived tonight, we find on our desk an urgent update, and lo and behold, paragraph 7.4 recommends option 2. I came here with an open mind on this, and then I'm thinking of possibly abstaining, but not quite sure yet now. The streamlining of the traffic flow through this junction will add to the congestion in Willington Street, which is caused by the section of the A20 Ashford Road between Willington Street and New Cut Road, which is very narrow, and that is where the hold-up occurs that causes the Willington Street traffic to back up. So I don't think this streamlining of the traffic flow through this junction is going to significantly improve the overall congestion on the east side of Maidstone. That's my opinion on that.
I'll move round. Councillor Mrs. Springett.
Thank you. It does seem a huge scheme for the amount of congestion that, I mean, I do drive this junction quite a lot, and it is only in the rush hour that I notice any problem. Earlier, we've heard Mr. Wright saying that Hermitage Lane isn't congested. It's not a problem. There's no schemes this vast for Hermitage Lane, which to my mind is much worse. And yet we're not putting 4 lanes in there and everything. We seem to be ignoring that, and that one's okay. And yet we're proposing a huge, what to me seems a huge scheme for a junction that doesn't seem as bad as Hermitage Lane. And I'm afraid, I do tend to agree with Councillor Cook. I think I think we need to look again at actually, is it that congested? I didn't support the local plan, I'm afraid, so I don't support what the inspector said, and I don't support his thoughts. I do think we need to look again, is it really that bad? And actually, if we rocket everybody through this junction, they'll all hit the queue at blooming Wheatsheaf. So we're just moving the queue. I'm not happy with it. I have listened to everything said tonight, and actually, if that's a proposal from Councillor Cook, I'll second it. Thank you.
That's noted. I wondered when that thought might crop up, because what we're actually looking at is the very traffic modelling evidence that we've actually sat around this very room and said this is why we cannot go ahead with this amount of development or whatever the argument might be. It's that very evidence that actually is being used in this model to show what is possible at this junction. So there's kind of a selective selection of when the evidence says one thing and not another, perhaps. If it's directly relevant, Mr. Jarman, but I am keen to move on.
Just in relation to Councillor Springett's point, we do have a strategic policy for the northwest of Maidstone, and it picks out the need to improve junctions, and it's both ends of Hermitage Lane.
Councillor Mrs Prendergast.
Thank you, Chairman. Much of what I wanted to say has already been covered by the first speaker. He made some really good points. My concern really is, I know the amount of work that's gone into working on this scheme, but, you know, we may find solutions for the junction itself, but I'm really concerned that we are going to create congestion and pinch points further down. And as an example, if anybody knows the North Circular between the Hanger Lane Gyratory and Chiswick Roundabout, there are 3 or 4 examples of which mirror this, where you see traffic merging from 2 or 3 lanes into 2 or 1, and in the middle lane, the absolute chaos and the congestion that is caused, and that will have, you know, an impact again then on air quality and, you know, other things. And I really don't think this scheme is the answer. The other thing that concerns me a little bit is, and I did speak to Mr. Borman about this just before Christmas, I don't know when the modelling was done, and we know that there's a significant quantum of development that this needs to address, but I don't believe it's taken into account things like the Junction 8 development. So I think a lot more work needs to be done on this. And as for the air quality issue, I'm surprised that the senior scientific officer is not here to speak on this, because as a speaker pointed out, it's not about the homes. You know, we have a strategy here at Maidstone that talks about walking, cycling, modal shift. What about those people walking on the pavements, waiting for buses, sitting on their bikes in traffic congestion? It just hasn't taken that into account, and I think something should be done on that. Thank you.
I wonder if that is a moment to bring in the air quality information, if we have any. Mr Egerton.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, so I have been in touch with the Air Quality Advisor, and I have this information. There is a difference between the local air quality management regime under which we operate and the EU directive, which applies to member states, not local authorities. Although numerically the pollution limits are the same, the national regime, which is driven by the EU directive and managed directly by DEFRA, is more macro scale and is really aimed at roads rather than people. But it's not any roads, it's the roads that have to meet specific criteria. So Maidstone's responsibilities as a local authority derive from Part 4 of the Environment Act 1995, which is different, and our duty is to measure pollution where people live rather on roads. Sometimes we measure on facades of properties, but for practical reasons, we often measure at roadsides and then apply a distance correction and calculate the level at the nearest property. Therefore, to say that nitrogen dioxide levels at the property 16 metres from the road are below the objective is what we are required to do. Not only that, the objective is an annual average. Therefore, consideration of individual months' data can be misleading as values do fluctuate and the results need to be bias-corrected. So the 2016 bias-corrected annual average for Ashley Gardens Care Home was significantly below the objective. And there will be fluctuations from month to month, and some months may well exceed due to specific traffic or weather conditions, but the annual average is what matters, and this must be bias corrected, which the monthly figures are not. Thank you.
I'm going to come back to you, Mrs. Perry, because I know this is your specialist subject, but trying to pick up on a very clear statement about concerning legality of air quality otherwise, but there you go.
Okay. I absolutely agree with Mr. Edgerton. Values do fluctuate. The wind blows a certain way and the values fluctuate. So there's no denying that. What I do disagree with is, as Maidstone members, we have a responsibility to our residents, present and in the future, to ensure that their health is not compromised by what we're doing. So I think we really should be taking that into account rather than, dealing with DEFRA figures, because this goes beyond that.
As indeed I think we are with our recently adopted air quality management plan. Councillor Hodson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Well, I don't know what all the argument's about. It's pretty easy from the south to get into Maidstone. There's no problem at all. I live in Staplehurst. It takes me 20 minutes to travel 20 miles. I leave at 6:30 in the morning to achieve that. Very, very soon, I shall be going in via this road rather than the A229. The A229 is far worse than the A274. And within the plan of 6 or 7 junctions here, one on the A229 in Staplehurst is not even mentioned. And 800 houses are going in there with no provision for highway improvement. There's some points which have been stated by officers this evening, Chairman, one quite recently with regards to highway land. I never knew what Councillor Cook had up his sleeve before this evening, but I'm minded to support his proposal. Specifically, having listened to 2 particular excellent presentations from members of the public. I thought their orations, their factual information was excellent. And of course, what also sways me is that there were 900 signatories. Now, 900, we have to listen to 900 people. I acknowledge and accept that highway land will be taken. There has to be. Because I'm acknowledging, and Kent County Council, I believe, has acknowledged over the last 2 or 3 years, that this junction needs improvement. Fully accept that. What I can't quite get to grips with is that this is a scheme which is costing £4 million. £4 million. And when Mrs. Hodson holds my hand every Friday and takes me to Morrison's, where I have to push and load a trolley, this junction is not overfull. It really is not overfull. It will get busier, and a scheme will ease the proposed and suggested congestion. So I'm minded to support the proposal on the condition that councillors, officers, try and put some timescales on this. Because although we've got £1.4 million of 106 money from developers, they'll get a sniff and they'll try and do some manoeuvring on that. I'm not worried about the local growth fund. That's guaranteed. There's no time pressures on that. That's about £2.4 million. So I think it is necessary to look at it again, but I do acknowledge that improvements are needed and there will be some land to be taken. Thank you, Chairman.
I will carry on down the line, but Councillor Perry's indicated. I suspect that the S word was mentioned, so it was inevitable. So we'll take you now because it'll tie in, I'm sure.
Yes, the S word, yes. Thank you, Chairman. I've just got a I wasn't going to speak tonight because I'm a sub and I've come in this argument a little bit late, although I do know all the issues. First of all, this is a very large scheme, and I actually think, listening to it, it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut, to use colloquial English language. I'm not impressed with getting a last-minute change in recommendation. Option 1, and suddenly I find on my desk, and I'm struggling to get through the working papers as well, another option. Not impressed with that. I think that's a very bad move. I think the loss of the cherry trees is very important, actually. Now, I know it's been kindly dismissed, and I've been to some of the presentations, but I think that's incredibly important. And I do agree with Councillor Burton when he said that we must recognise the public opinion here, and it's very, very important. I think sometimes we don't take into account public opinion enough. But the issue that I'm really concerned about is the legal statement that was given by Mr. Fitzpatrick, because I'm very concerned about that, and I agree entirely with Councillor Hodgson. Yeah. I really do. And I think this should be really underlined. And let me say straight away, I'm not impressed by local plan arguments either. I voted against the local plan, and I sit here quite proudly saying I stood up and did, because there's a lot of issues there I didn't like. Now, I know we're in a democratic position, and I go, obviously, with the democratic view. But I'm not impressed with those arguments. And I think we need to really get more information on what that's all about. So, really, what I'm coming back to is, very quickly, I do think Councillor Cook has hit the nail on the head here. I think we need, given everything I've heard tonight, I really have come here with an open mind, I feel that his proposal is the right one, and that we need to look again at this, because I think he's raised so many issues in my head tonight that I find it extremely difficult to go with this. And I apologise, Chairman, but I've been listening very closely to the arguments, and I think the public arguments have been very, very well made as well, and I would like to thank them for that. They've impressed me no end. I'll leave it there, Chairman. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
And he didn't mention the S word. I am impressed. I'm going to move down. Councillor Carter, were you wanting to come in?
I am indeed, yes, thank you. Let's make it quite clear. The principle behind the whole series of junction improvements in Maidstone, Kent County Council totally support. And I worked enormously hard at the South East Let Board and the Accountability Board to make sure that this package of programmes of works got the endorsement of the Secretary of State against a very, very heavy, long list of competing schemes across the South East Lep in Essex, East Sussex and Kent. What I'm very keen to do is to make sure that we spend that money wisely. The junction with the A274 Willington Street does need some improvement. When we talked about the package of improvements, this junction was fairly modest. We do have the ability to underspend to other projects. I understand that there may be a more comprehensive solution to the Wheatsheaf junction, and therefore we need to spend every penny very wisely so that we have the money in the jar for additional expenditure on other junctions. And there can't be any person that's sane in this room that wouldn't agree that the Wheatsheaf junction improvement is the one, if there is a possibility of delivering significant improvements, is the one that we should focus on. As has already been said, the current design is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It is over-engineered, and frankly, I don't think it'll work. I really don't. It doesn't deal with 2 or 3 very, very important issues, one of which, as Mr. Cook's referred to, on the Wallace Avenue junction. But the other one that is the biggest pain in the neck is when you approach the A274 from Willington Street, past Moat Park, coming up to either turn left or right. If you turn left in my direction of travel to go towards Sutton Valence, you are blocked by the filter of the traffic building up to turn right. And it holds up the whole traffic all the way down Willington Street. And that's a simple junction improvement that can be sorted cheaply at modest cost and ought to be got on with. And the other issue is at the BP Garage junction, which I've mentioned several times to my officers, that the traffic queuing up to either ingress or egress the BP station and the junction that goes to the right next to it, the name of which I cannot remember, that leads into Park Wood, is another massive pinch point. As far as bus prioritisation is concerned, what we need is buses that can pull into lay-bys off the main road so that other traffic can go past the bus while school children in the morning in the rush hour are getting onto the bus and off the bus, and commuters into town can get on and off the bus. And if that lay-by has to have a few priority traffic lights on it to allow the bus back on to the A274, great. And that'll tick the box with that planning inspector. That was his opinion, not shared by many of us. One thing that is absolutely unanimous when we discussed the potential of the officer-led charge to have a bus lane down the Sutton Road, every person sitting in this room unanimously stuck their hand in the air and said, we are not having a bus lane down the A274 in this neck of the woods. And that was minuted and recorded. I agree with Mr Cook's amendment. I think there may have to be modest ingress into the greenery, either side, to widen the carriageways modestly, that preserve most of the trees and the shrubs that would currently be desecrated under this. And don't give me evidence from traffic modelling. We were all in this room when Amy, for the first time, gave us the traffic modelling of the impact of housing growth in this neck of the woods. And they said that building a load more houses in this area town would lead to severe pressure on the highways network in this vicinity. And I asked the question quite innocently of the man from Amy. I said, you're an expert in this field. You travel up and down the country doing these traffic surveys. On the scale of ghastliness, how serious is the impact that you're calling severe? And he said it is that everybody, most of the people in this room with the same audience, that this is one of the severest cases that I have seen. And then what happens? Maidstone Borough Council then ignore it and decide to get another traffic modelling survey. He who pays the piper calls the tune, and they had a slightly different opinion thereof. So my trust in the professionals that produce these traffic modelling surveys that vary from acceptable to severe leaves a scar in my mind. So we are where we are. I think that we're going to have the vast majority of the councillors sitting in this room tonight that say, go back to the drawing board. We want the junction improvement, but they need to be intelligently thought through and, most importantly, work.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I must say that I wholeheartedly agree with the motion put forward by Mr Cook, and on that basis I wish to second that motion. I was particularly disappointed with the arguments from Maidstone Borough Council with regards to this, essentially trying to bully us into agreeing to this scheme. Now, I don't think anyone around this table is opposed to some sort of junction improvements here, but what I certainly am opposed to is this type of over-engineering and poor value for money. I'm also opposed to the bus prioritisation. This war on the motorist must stop. If this junction improvement is to deliver such an impressive scenario as is suggested, why on earth would bus prioritisation therefore be required? I wonder if somebody could answer that.
Mr Bourbon, do you want to?
It was a requirement of the local plan for us to actually go away and actually look at the modelling to include bus prioritisation within this junction and obviously the other junctions within the Maidstone Integrated Transport package. We've actually had two sets of modelling carried out, and if I can just pick up on that point now, Mr Chairman, obviously regarding the modelling work that's actually been carried out on this individual junction to actually demonstrate how these achievements will be made. We've had independent traffic counts done on this junction. We haven't taken any of the existing data. We've actually had independent traffic counts done to inform the decisions moving forward. We've had two independent consultants actually model the junction independently of each other using that information. So the actual source of information is quite clean. Obviously we are very much of the opinion that what we're saying will be achieved, And just coming back to, obviously, the bus prioritisation, yes, you're correct, it works without bus prioritisation. It also works with bus prioritisation. So,
I was just going to remind ourselves of actually this board's resolution in relation to that, and I think we said we don't have a problem with buses providing they don't get in our way, and we said, you know, we'd support it providing it's of no detriment to the motorist. And I think this report actually says if you're lucky enough to be the car behind the bus, you actually get an advantage without anybody being disadvantaged. But that's a bit of background. But if you wish to come back, Councillor Cooper.
If I could come back to it, the reason I want to come back with it and really press on this issue is because I understand the need perhaps for bus prioritisation on that basis. However, if this junction improvement is going to improve things to the level that it's intended to, how on earth is bus prioritisation going to improve things any further? That's what I really want to get to the crux of.
The actual improvement or the implementation of bus prioritisation isn't to improve upon the situation that's actually been documented within the report. The minutes that have been documented are without the bus prioritisation. It was a need for us to come back to this board and demonstrate whether bus prioritisation actually was of a detrimental impact to the travelling public, which it isn't, and which is what we've demonstrated and done today.
Councillor Cook, you want to come in on another round before we carry on, or?
Chairman, I'd just like to mention something that, about the bus prioritisation, because it does concern me. I think I've been very vocal in my opposition to bus lanes along the Sutton Road, and people will remember that. I read with concern 6.5 in the urgent update this evening, which somewhat contradicts what Mr. Mormon was just saying, that it really doesn't make any difference in terms of bus prioritisation, yes or no. Because 6.5 says it must be noted that this system will only be successful if the bus is able to approach the traffic signals with ease and not in the congested situation as currently being experienced. Now, I recognise that the thought process behind that is to relieve the congestion. But somewhere in the back of my mind is, if there is congestion and we've got extra lanes there, at some point, however short or however long, there will be 7 letters painted onto the road. The first 3 are BUS, and the second 4 will be LANE. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, I must say that Councillor Hodson always has been and always will be my inspiration. He is my guru, my leader, and he made a point earlier on which really leads me to remind you of one thing. He said that if these improvements go through, he will actually be using this way to travel into Maidstone. And it's been proven in the past that where you have road improvement, it actually attracts traffic. And many, many times in my experience in Maidstone, we've called for traffic improvements, and then you've thought to yourself, hang on, if we do that, that will actually, people will say, look, we've got a much better way to get into Maidstone or out of Maidstone, let's all use it. The danger here is you put improved roads in, it will attract even more traffic.
Okay. So do nothing, let the weeds grow in the roads, and all the cars will go away. That's the corollary.
Mr. Chairman, if you would like to take a lead from the medical profession, they at this moment in time are recommending watch and wait.
Population decrease equals less traffic, problem solved. I see where you're going with that. Is that Councillor Chittenden or Councillor Birds? Yeah, Councillor Chittenden.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've listened with interest with all the debate that's gone on. Lots of comments from officers, the comments from members. I'm in the stage of being a combination of totally confused now what we should do, and not only that, it sounds as if we all just want to bury our heads in the sand, which I hope we are not. I hope I'm totally wrong. Just a couple of things first. Firstly, I want to support what Mr. Carter said with regard to that there's no easy solution, that we are under threat for another 40%. I suspect we will get something like it. I hope we don't. And that we're going to have to find a way of taking that on board. And that means we've got till our review of the local plan, which is probably, I don't know, 3-4 years away, to sort this out, which means we, as two councils, have got to start working together as soon as possible. And I believe there are problems on both sides, but I think if both sides don't come together, we are never going to solve what we've got at the moment, and we are not going to solve the problem in 4 years' time. So please, please, no matter what's happened in the past, please let's go away and start working together. I think behind the scenes there's elements of a start of it. Please pursue that. Now that's the good positive, and you're not going to like everything I say from here on. The second point is that we spent 9 months of KCC fighting the projects on the Sutton Road, which were part of the local plan list, for which we desperately needed to get that local plan so that we had a 5-year land supply, so we could object to other applications. We actually must need, they fought us saying, here we are, here's our officers telling them what the situation is on that road. They took the work off every other area to do that work on the Sutton Road. Here they are, this is what we're going to say, and of course Maidstone come up with somebody who says, no, that's wrong, and the inspector, actually after a detailed look at it, agreed with Maidstone. But having said, oh, here we are, here's our officers who are great, we come to something like this, and we are told, ignore our officers, they don't know what they're talking about. How can we then take Mr. Cook's proposal and say, oh, well, actually, why don't we tell them to go away and look for a smaller one? We've already been told by officers that a smaller one won't work. We've already been told by officers we've seen it. How can we? I can't vote for it. I want a couple of other points I'm going to make, then I'm going to just make a final statement. Mr. Cook, you know the road doesn't end at the curbs. You know that. I put 60 trees in my area. Brian's put 40 trees down the Sutton Road. We also know, and I wasn't going to use it tonight, but I brought it just in case, we also know the lane was dead. The bus lane is dead. That's the original plan. That's the 880-page petition the Liberal Democrats got in and objected. And we were working together because we all got in and objected to the bus lane. It was taken away. That's where bus prioritisation comes from. And that can be made to work. But to be honest, Mr. Chairman, I am so confused as what's been said tonight. I'm not going to vote for the original proposal, and I'm not going to vote for Mr. Cook's amendment, because I'm not going to vote for something, an amendment. You've done it before, Gary. You come here, we get the proposal with a lot of officers' detail, and you come up with something that to us to really understand what we're voting for, we need some sort of officer understanding briefing as well. And I'm not voting for it without it again. I've done this before with various discussions. So, Chairman, I am going to abstain. And the reason I'm going to abstain is because I'm totally confused about what the right way to go. And Mr. Carter, you're the boss of KCC. Why didn't you tell your officers beforehand? What is this coming to us? Why has this come to us today if clearly so many in KCC don't want it? Please, please, sort it out. Why should we sit here for an hour and listen when quite clearly, if it comes out of here, when it goes up to the KCC, it's going to be chucked out in any case. Thank you, Chairman. I apologise for that. It wasn't very technical, but that's how I feel at the moment.
You can indeed.
We have a rule within our group at Kent County Council. Officers advise, members decide. Long may that continue.
Who have we got left? Is it Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chairman. I actually speak as possibly the only member in this committee that spoke against all three proposals in 2014 at planning that brought about this whole initiative. And at the time, it was something of great concern. But as it went through planning and received all-party consensus with mitigation at this junction, at the time there was no objection from KCC. And at the time, the local plan hadn't been signed off. This was a planning scheme that came forward, and many people had a lot of concerns about this type of development in the south of Maidstone. And unfortunately, this is now a scheme that does have permission, has been built out, and ultimately we need to mitigate the traffic. We've only got until 2021 to spend this money, so we've got to be tight in the way that we work the traffic mitigation. We can't say there'll be a relief road in 10 years' time or whenever it may be to get the 55 million. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be putting money towards a relief road, but unfortunately the big concern is that we may lose it. And if we need traffic mitigation of whatever form, we need to make sure we keep the money. Now, in terms of this actual scheme, if you were the resident that lived opposite the bus stop in this verge area, and you look out across the road, even with the topology as it is currently, you are facing Balmeadow, a bus rebate, should I say, but it's the width of a lane, 2 lanes of carriageway, a lane of Hatchings, and 3 lanes on the southbound part of Sutton Road. So you're actually looking out on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lanes. Now, when I looked at these plans, even in the form that they are laid out, in terms of traffic flows, my first concern was the hatched area. If you look along Royal Engineers Way as you approach the roundabout by the White Rabbit, there are thin verge areas with planting. Now, there is scope, in my opinion, to soften this freeway-like outlook at this point, even if you keep the current setup. The bus stop, my concern is that the bus stop is there because there's a bus stop there currently, but I'm not sure that that is the best place to put a bus stop. Just because it's there currently, we can still have a bus stop, but I feel if we went further south, we could reduce the impact on this part of the scheme, even if we kept the current throughput on the scheme. Now, I do have some concerns about us prescriptively telling officers to go away and come up with a smaller scheme, because I feel that we're just doing this on the fly. And I just feel that we may constrain officers in a way where they may even have an outcome that they could move forward with, and it could be suitable for residents. But because we're doing something on the fly tonight, we're going to close that door on officers. So I would like to make an amendment to the motion that we defer for a single cycle of the JTB, and we allow officers to go away, not to come back with a fully designed scheme, because it's clearly not going to happen in one JTB cycle, but if officers could come back with a tangible approach to how we deal with traffic mitigation at this junction, keeping the 106 money and keeping the correct level of mitigation for the level of housing that's going to happen. Clearly this is not going down well with anyone around this table. I just feel one cycle, let's work out what the plan should be rather than prescriptively telling officers what they should be doing with the design at this point.
I'm going to go back to Councillor Cook just in case he's minded to accept that amendment.
I'm not, Chairman. I think in terms of being prescriptive to the officers, there is nothing more prescriptive than telling them they have to come back with a report on one cycle of the JTB. I deliberately worded the motion in the way that I did to allow officers the discretion, both from the point of view of timing, but giving a clear indication what members of the board, if they're minded to support the motion, want, which will pay some level of regard to, and properly mitigating the concerns of residents.
A couple of members I need to come back to, but for my two pennyworth at this moment, the bit I can't get past is we've said to the officer, do you think it's possible to deliver a scheme of a reduced scale that gives the benefit? And the answer was a pretty categorical, I don't think it can be done. And we know that the original scheme that they started working with was a smaller scheme. And when they worked that up, it said, this will not solve the traffic issue. So the bit I'm really struggling with is we're going back on something that the professional advice in the room has already said, we've looked at, we've done it. I don't know. So that's the difficulty I'm having at the moment. Councillor Willis and then Councillor Chittenden.
My daughter and lots of people in West Maidstone go out walking in the woods. You've heard me bang on about it. Bluebell Woods. That woods is having a road through the middle of it. The reason why I bring that up is the reason why that woods is that ancient woodland is having a road on the edge of it or through it is basically because we didn't have a 5-year land supply at that time and we couldn't argue in the appeal. That's one of the main reasons I'm happy to change to be legal, but that's one of the arguments we were losing on at the time. We now have a 5-year land supply due to 2,651, a huge amount of homes that have been given outline, either given permission or in a local plan that's been inspected in that corridor. So I just want to frame this. We need to find a solution to this issue. And we as a council, the majority of us, have voted for a solution that includes some level of modal shift. I think that's really important. That's clean, less pollutive transport that will take up some percentage of the traffic. It's not the complete answer, but that's what we've in policy have agreed. So however we deal with this, we've got to come back with something that actually delivers something that will actually give us a way of helping decrease traffic in Maidstone and actually provide another way of travelling. So the officers, if they're going to go away and do something different, they've still got to come back with something that enables us to keep a 5-year land supply, which is really important. I'll remind you again, there's areas of woodland that were basically built on because, in my understanding, we didn't have a clear 5-year land supply. I'm willing for an officer to tell me I'm wrong with that, but I think that's pretty much it. So this item is really important that we go away and find a solution. I think residents and the way it's been presented has been excellent. There are points that even emotionally get me, and I want to promote public transport, and this is actually about having a way through with bus prioritisation, I think. I understand that, the issue about ashes in oaks. I don't know the geography of that. I hear about the pollution question mark. That probably needs more looking at, but I'm not so sure on it. But most importantly, the officers need to be given a chance to go away and find a scheme that will work. And it needs to involve whatever the leader of the county says, and I heard you make a comment about that, it needs to involve some level of modal shift. And I think that needs to have X amount of lanes. Not a bus lane, not Councillor Cook, not a bus lane, we've all agreed on that, but something that provides a way of transport, sustainable transport and private cars getting through a junction. So I'd like to second Councillor Clark's motion and hope we can move forward positively to find something for future generations.
Procedurally, an amendment is put and it's seconded. So we've got to vote that in or out, just procedurally. Yeah, Councillor Willis has seconded the amendment, right? So we've got to deal with that procedurally. I think I'll guess which way this is going to go. Councillor Clark, would you just summarise that amendment?
My amendment is that we should not prescriptively restrict officers at this point. We should ask officers to consider all of the concerns that have been discussed around this table tonight, and we defer this item for one JTB cycle such that officers can come back with a plan, an approach as to how we can move forward with traffic mitigation for the three schemes mentioned and the developer contributions that we're holding. I don't necessarily want them to come back with a design. I just want them to come back and say this is how we can move forward within the timescales required to keep the Section 106 money and in order to mitigate the increased traffic movements along the Sutton Road associated with those three.
I think so as I'm understanding, what you're asking is taking Councillor Cook's motion but adding to it that we defer submitting the recommendation pending the next meeting to allow officers to put fresh thoughts on the table. Is that?
I would really like to see an approach in how we resolve this.
Right.
A very
You've put a motion. It's not clear what your motion is. I'm going to need to press you to be very precise and perhaps write that down for us so that we can actually consider it or not. Because I get the inference of what you're saying, but we need to be very clear.
It's something that happens in planning all the time. We defer for one cycle to give officers the opportunity.
So it's not an amendment, it's an alternative motion.
Councillor Cook has indicated that he would like to defer this, but he gave very prescriptive reasons behind the deferment and no timescale. I'm making an amendment where I'm tightening up the timescale, which is next JTB, and I'm not limiting officers because I feel that if we try to limit officers, we might actually harm the residents that are trying to look for a better scheme.
I'm just trying to tie this up. So it's exactly as Councillor Cook has said it.
No, it's not. Well, with the respect, Chairman, on a point of information, my motion was explicit that the current scheme be rejected. What Councillor Clark is recommending is we defer this and we give the officers a cycle to go away and come back and re-justify the scheme that we're looking at this evening.
Well,
I'm not.
Councillor Cook has reiterated what he means by or has said. And is there an amendment to that from yourself?
I think I was very clear. I think I was very clear in the fact that this committee is rejecting the model as it is proposed currently. So we need to move forward from this. We're not accepting this specific model. It's clearly been rejected. So I'm asking officers to go away and come back in one JTB cycle to explain how we can move forward in the constraints that we are facing, and those constraints include the fact that we don't want to lose the Section 106 money, and we do want to mitigate the three schemes that are causing increased congestion along the Sutton Road.
Okay, I'm not clear what that means. You know, what you're saying is don't restrict it to a smaller scheme option.
No, I think I was quite clear.
Yeah, but you're making a statement, and I've not got a tidy motion that we can actually put to members, or an amendment. I need a few words that really means what you mean.
There are several constraints that we are faced with if we are going to use the Section 106 money. The constraints are that they should mitigate.
Yeah, I understand that. Could you put a concise amendment?
My concern is if we say officers need to come back with a smaller scheme, that may not mitigate the traffic impact. So I'm trying not to restrict officers, but to give us one
I
JTB
understand
cycle.
what you're saying. I'm going to move on because what I'm asking for is something concise that I can put to the board and they can yes or no. And I keep getting a statement. So unless you can give me something tight that I can actually say, well, do we agree or not, I've got nowhere to go. So I'm going to move on in the absence of that.
Perhaps I can call officers in at this point to see if they believe that that is a reasonable approach?
No. I'm asking, give me some words that we can vote on one way or another or not, and I'm not getting them. I understand where you're coming from, but I'm not...
Okay. My amendment is that we defer this junction improvement for one JTB cycle such that officers have the opportunity to consider the concerns raised in this meeting and to inform the JTB of their plan to move forward on this junction development.
Legal and administrative officer help me if need be, but I think that is an alternative motion. It's not an amendment. So to proceed with your suggestion, the first motion would need to be defeated. Because you're not actually saying how you would amend those words, you're putting an alternative on the table.
As a point of order, could the legal officer confirm one way or the other? The clerk to the board concurs that it appears to be an alternative motion, not an amendment. I am going to move on. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? I'm going to take what we have to the vote. I think we're quite clear on that. Before doing so, I'm going to have my fight. I still have an issue that the officers have told us there isn't an in-between scheme, and I don't know where this goes. Can I just ask one final question of the officers? On page 46, 3.6, it says the Cabinet member has already given the go-ahead for this. So, will the Cabinet member need... Well, I'll see if the officers... But that's what it says, to progress. Approval, right? So, will the Cabinet member need to unmake that decision, or could you just clarify where we're at?
The Cabinet member approved the previous reduced scheme. The Cabinet member at the time was looking at a reduced scheme. So the Cabinet member has not approved this scheme and still needs to approve
that's
whatever...
That's perfectly clear, so I just want to get that right. So, the motion, will you say the words one last time, or have you got them written down? Would you say the words one last time and we'll go straight to the vote?
I'll say it slowly. Maidstone Joint Transportation Board recommends this scheme be not accepted as currently proposed and recommends that KCC be asked to amend the scheme to a smaller scale, retaining the grass verges and trees whilst paying more attention to local pinch points. Now, in that, it is inherent, Chairman, that we all recognise that some of the green verges will have to be attached.
Well,
that's
your words are set now, yes?
Yeah.
That is the motion you've seconded, I think, Councillor Mrs Springer. Last opportunity, and then we go to the vote.
Thank you, Chairman. There seems to be an inconsistency with Mr Cook's motion and the words he's just said. Either the grass verges and the vegetation will be retained, or some of it will be lost. His motion precludes any loss of any of the verges.
No, I think you said acknowledges that some may be lost.
Yes.
Yes? Yes?
Was that in the motion?
Yes. Yeah. Reduced scheme acknowledging some may be lost. Right. I'm going to ask for those in favour to indicate, please. Those against? Abstentions? Abstention. That motion is carried. And that does conclude that item. It just leaves us one very small thing just to tidy up. Agenda item 18, Highways Works Programme. It's only for your information. It's attached to the papers, just for noting. And having said that, I believe we can conclude the meeting for this evening. Thank you all for your participation and your input this evening, and for your patience, and thanks to the officers. Meeting closed.